On Highways and Transit will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. Again, that's documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today's hearing builds on the subcommittee's efforts to examine key issues concerning our nation's surface transportation programs as we work to develop and enact an on-time, multi-year surface bill. At our previous hearings, we received testimony on the importance of this subcommittee's programs to the American trucking industry, which has an instrumental role in the safe and efficient movement of goods across the highway system to each and every one of our communities. Today's hearing further examines these programs and their impacts with a specific focus on our motor carriers. As a predominant users of the highway system, the trucking industry moved nearly 2/3 of all goods into our communities in 2023. That's 12.9 billion freight tons worth an estimated $13.56 trillion. In fact, 80% of communities across the country depend solely on trucks to receive their goods. More than likely, every member of this subcommittee represents a community that exclusively relies on trucking to stock their supermarket shelves, transport critical medicines to local pharmacies, and ensure retail stores have merchandise. In North Carolina, for example, 85.6% of communities are dependent on trucking. The industry supports 1 out of every 15 jobs across the state, and I'm grateful to those men and women who day in and day out take on the task of delivering for all North Carolinians. And this is true all over the country. The trucking workforce's commitment to delivering for North Carolinians was on full display last year when Hurricane Helene ripped through our state, devastating communities, wiping out homes, and killing more than 100 people. In the wake of the storm, truckers across the state and region, and across the country, quite frankly, rallied without hesitation to deliver much-needed aid to our friends and neighbors. The bottom line is that truckers deliver essential goods when disaster strikes and serve as a key partner in larger emergency coordination and relief efforts. While federal law provides for targeted regulatory relief from certain restrictions during those times, we will continue to explore ways to help improve disaster response outcomes. And despite the importance of trucking to our communities and the supply chain at large, challenges continue to plague the trucking industry and the men and women behind the wheel. I suspect our witnesses today and encourage our witnesses today to detail some of the broad challenges the industry faces, including growing and retaining the truck driver workforce, ensuring seamless compliance with federal, state, and local rules and regulations, and addressing rising costs associated with moving goods from point A to point B for both small and large operators. We have an opportunity in our surface bill to address such challenges in a smart and targeted manner while strengthening local communities and our economy. I look forward to working with my colleagues on the subcommittee to make it easier for women and men to choose this profession, and in so doing, we must explore ways to make it easier for individuals to train and test for a commercial driver's license, as well as build off the Safe Driver Apprenticeship Program established in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to allow 18 to 20-year-old drivers to cross state lines. So we welcome, panel, your ideas about how to help the trucking industry continue to safely and efficiently deliver for all of our communities. I now recognize Ranking Member Norton for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank Subcommittee Chair Rouser for holding this hearing on the importance of the trucking sector. These last 5 years have reminded us again and again of the great debt we owe our trucking workforce. Despite a pandemic and global and domestic supply chain disruptions, truckers have never stopped delivering essential goods. 73% of all domestic freight by weight, from groceries to life-saving medicine, are moved by trucks. I would like to recognize the 5 District of Columbia area truck drivers from Teamsters Local 639 who are in attendance today. Stephen Raybould, DeJoyne Jarvis Sr., William Olden, Clarence Carey, and John Wright. Top of mind today is ensuring truck drivers are paid the wages they deserve. While many work more than 60-hour weeks, they are often paid by the load, not the hour, and are responsible for funding their own fuel and health care. Drivers also face other challenges in doing their jobs, including inadequate parking and rest areas. Providing our drivers with safe workplaces and fair wages is key to regaining and growing the trucking workforce. We cannot discuss trucking in America without considering the safety of both drivers and those who share roads with them. Over the past 2 decades, more and more people have lost their lives each year in large truck crashes. And in 2022, that number reached almost 6,000 deaths. We know that these fatal crashes frequently involved faster speeds and the involvement of vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians, bicyclists, and construction workers. This committee must prioritize reducing truck speeds by getting the technology that already exists, such as speed limiters and automatic braking, onto trucks as quickly as possible. Lives are on the line. Additionally, as we consider the next Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, we must continue the safety investments we made in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. These programs are currently deploying infrastructure across the country and will protect bicyclists and pedestrians from avoidable truck crashes. This Congress, we have an opportunity to maintain these efforts and find new ways to make progress on safety. I have long supported strong entry-level driver training standards to ensure that truckers are fully prepared to safely operate their vehicles and deliver their freight. Providing robust training empowers drivers to be safe and confident on the road. Finally, we know that fraud is currently plaguing the industry. Fraudulent brokers, carriers, and operators are using deceptive practices to steal from businesses and take advantage of consumers. This is why I introduced, with Representative Mike Ezell, the bipartisan bicameral Household Goods Shipping Consumer Protection Act, which would clarify the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's authority to take action against scammers and limit their costly and unsafety operations from even starting. I'm eager to work with this committee to pass this bill. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and hearing their proposals to improve safety, support workers, and improve the ability of the trucking industry to efficiently move goods. I ask unanimous consent to enter a letter from the Institute of Safer Trucking and Road Safe America into the record.
Without objection.
I yield back my time.
I'd now like to welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. We are joined by John Elliott, who's testifying on behalf of the Truckload Carriers Association. We're also joined by Louis Pugh, representing the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Ryan Lindsay, who's here testifying on behalf of the Shippers Coalition. Dan Glessing, who's testifying on behalf of the American Farm Bureau Federation and currently serves as president of Minnesota Farm Bureau and farmer himself. And last but certainly not least, we have Cole Scandalia. Is that how you pronounce that? Did I get that about right? Very pleased to have you here representing the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. So briefly, I'll take just a quick moment to explain the lighting system. Very self-explanatory. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means you're running out of time, and red means wrap it up as quick as you possibly can. Otherwise, I might have to gavel you down. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. So with that, Mr. Elliott, you are now recognized for 5 minutes. You may proceed.
Chairman Rouser and members of the Highway and Transit Subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today on behalf of the Truckload Carriers Association. TCA is the only national trade association whose collective sole focus is the truckload segment of the trucking industry, representing carriers across 48 contiguous U.S. states, Alaska, Canada, and Mexico. My company, Load One, founded in 2003 just outside of Detroit, Michigan, is an expedited freight carrier that is today ranked as one of the 3 largest expedited companies in the United States by the Journal of Commerce. My operations account for over 700 power units. I'm a 3rd-generation transportation professional and a proud Army veteran and a strong believer in innovation as an opportunity to improve. With these principles in mind, I provide my testimony before you today. It is no surprise to anyone in the room that trucking brings value to the U.S. economy and the citizens living here. Our industry enjoys being the most flexible form of freight delivery in the world, and we proudly say, if you own it, a truck brought it. It is with that notion that we cannot fully stress enough the importance of the highway reauthorization to an industry that annually operates hundreds of billions of miles on U.S. highways, delivering the goods and services that this nation relies upon daily. Increasing the federal fuel tax to pay into the Highway Trust Fund is a proposal that has been discussed for years as a potential solution to address the infrastructure funding challenges in the United States. And there may not be a better time to incorporate that model than exists today. Pairing a fuel tax increase at a time when fuel, both gasoline and diesel, are projected to continue falling, combined with an electric vehicle fee for those who operate electric-powered vehicles, could be paramount to continually sustain the trust fund for years to come. Trucking is proud to do its part in maintaining the workplace of our professional drivers and those that we share the road with. Still, we must continue to engage in discussions that address the real issues surrounding this funding. Now is the time to create a funding mechanism that removes tangible and outdated taxes, such as the federal excise tax, and establishes a road usage fee that takes administrative costs into consideration rather than pushing this into the next piece of legislation, again, thinking that someone else can solve this problem. As this committee examines the shortcomings of what the IIJA lacked upon its introduction in 2021, we can look no further than the lack of funding to create safer and secure truck parking for our drivers today. I commend Congressman Bost for his leadership in championing this effort to increase truck parking spaces across the country by again reintroducing H.R. 1659, the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act. Already viewed as bipartisan with 27 co-sponsors, this legislation must be considered must-have language towards the future of our highways to increase the number of parking spaces from one spot to every 11 drivers for more opportunities for places to rest when these drivers are trying to comply with federal hours of service rules. I would be remiss if my oral comments did not reflect upon the reauthorization bills that were enacted before IIJA. The FAST Act, signed into law December 4th of 2015, included language allowing motor carriers to use hair follicle testing as an acceptable alternative to urine-based testing for its drug testing protocols. This provision was a significant step forward for our industry, as it allowed for more effective drug testing methods. However, it has been almost 10 years since this language has been bestowed upon our industry. Personally, it is a travesty to me that the federal agency can block the directions of Congress for almost a decade while allowing known drug users to operate commercial vehicles on our roadways. Passing a urine test is a requirement to obtain a CDL. Hair follicle testing detects drug use 11 times more effectively than urine. TCA has carrier members who have participated in a recent study with 7 total trucking companies who have utilized both hair testing and urine-based testing for pre-employment screening of almost 88,000 drivers. Analyzing the survey results, the 7 large motor carriers found that 4,362 drivers failed the hair test, with only 403 of them failing the urine test. That is the difference that our industry and this Congress should no longer ignore. Unfortunately, the situation is even more dire than testing alone. These motor carriers have employed hair follicle testing for their own measures, have not been able to submit these drug test results to the National Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, allowing these drivers to work immediately for other carriers when only using urine testing. At a time when conversations lean towards the potential reclassification of marijuana from Schedule I to Schedule III narcotic, demonstrating that this problem is likely to only grow, our industry in its entirety is unable to properly employ the proper tests to identify habitual users and enter them into a substance abuse program and begin the return of duty procedures. As I mentioned earlier, as a firm believer in innovation, I reference the technological improvements that our industry continues to advance. Automatic emergency braking, AEB technology, with its potential to react quickly in emergency situations to prevent and mitigate accidents, primarily due to human error, fatigue, or distraction, offers a promising future for trucking safety. In our own experience with AEBs, the technology has proven itself time and time again. They may not prevent every rear-end accident, but when they don't, the accident severity is indeed mitigated. In conclusion, I am grateful for the opportunity to testify before you today on behalf of the Truckload Carriers Association and have submitted more substantial comments for the docket for consideration. I'm happy to take any questions and look forward to working with members Rouser and other members of the subcommittee to support efforts to meet the challenges our industry faces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pugh.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Louis Pugh. I am the Executive Vice President of the Owner-Operator and Independent Drivers Association. Prior to working at OIDA, I was a small business carrier for 23 years, with racking up 2.5 million safe miles of driving. Prior to that, I was a truck driver in the United States Army, and I still hold my CDL today. OIDA is the largest association representing small business truckers and professional drivers. We have 150,000 members across this country that collectively operate 240,000 pieces of equipment, and we have members living in every district of this committee. OIDA's mission is to promote and protect the interest of our members on any issues that impact their safety and success. The highway bill is the Super Bowl during this Congress, and this committee has an opportunity to pass the most pro-trucker highway bill in history. But I want to be clear that pro-trucker and pro-trucking are not always synonymous these days. In fact, many of the policies being touted as good for trucking industry are primarily designed to fatten the wallets and cover the butts of trucking executive corporate shareholders, shippers, brokers, and money-hungry trial lawyers. Most of these proposals prioritize profit over safety by doubling down on many of the problems that have made careers behind the wheel less appealing and sustainable and our roads less safe. Continued acceptance of the widely debunked driver shortage myth has unfortunately convinced many of you that diluting credential standards, resisting enhanced driver training, lowering ages of CDL requirements, and bringing in more cheap foreign drivers is somehow good for trucking. You'll hear a lot today about the need to increase size and weights as something that is good for trucking. Make no mistake, These proposals are losers for truckers and highway safety. I want to especially caution new members of the committee about supporting these controversial increases. One vote to increase today's limits will have every group that wants a special treatment expecting you to support their specific carve-out for the rest of your tenure. Our conversations about what to include in the next highway bill continue after this hearing. Other organizations will propose a dizzying list of unproven and unworkable regulations, and some large carriers will legitimize these proposals with their support, not because they're supposed commitment to improving safety, but because excessive regulations will drive up costs of their small business competitors. Trial lawyers will even tell you today's minimum insurance levels requirements for motor carriers are insufficient, despite federal research indicating that the levels covers damages of 99% of crashes involving trucks. In contrast, OOIDA is sharing our vision for highway safety that supports American workers, enhances the supply chain efficiency, and improves highway safety from the ground up by focusing on the most important element of trucking, the millions of hardworking men and women across this country who make their living on the road. Our goal is to shape federal policy in a manner to make trucking a more attractive and sustainable and safe career for professional drivers. In the end, we're working with bipartisan members of this committee on key policies that will help develop a generation of safe drivers while simultaneously keeping today's experienced drivers behind the wheel. These policies include ending the truck parking crisis, combating freight fraud, guaranteeing broker transparency, ensuring restroom access for truckers at shipping facilities, reducing the perpetual driver turnover rates at large carriers, enhancing entry-level driver training requirements, preventing the counterproductive speed limiter mandate, eliminating predatory lease-to-own schemes, and more. In my written testimony, we provided a blueprint for members of this committee who share our goal of passing the most pro-trucker surface transportation reauthorization in history. I look forward to discussing these plans with you during the questioning, and thank you very much.
Mr. Lindsay?
Good morning.
Recognized.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Norton, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on the policies and programs affecting the U.S. trucking industry on behalf of the Shippers Coalition. My name is Ryan Lindsay. I'm the grandson of a dairy farmer, the grandson of a truck driver, and the son of a ditch digger who proudly still holds his CDL today. Growing up in a family business in Texas, I saw firsthand the critical role that truckers and trucking plays in building our communities and building our infrastructure. Today, I serve as Executive Vice President of CRH. CRH is the largest building materials business in the world. Although you may not know who CRH is, you very well know us as APAC, Mid-South in Alabama, Michigan Paving in Michigan, or Shelley Companies in Ohio. Our 50,000 employees across 48 states in 2,500 operating locations are integral parts of the communities that you represent. We have some challenges facing our supply chain. It is harder today than ever before to move goods. Congress has the ability to make meaningful changes that would have big impacts on the way goods are moved across the country. Now look, we all know these supply chain problems exist and want to work in lockstep with Congress to address this together. Our charge every day is to move goods from point A to point B in the safest, least disruptive, most efficient way possible. And to do that, we utilize ships, barges, rail, and most critically, we utilize trucks. In addition to the thousands of contract haulers we use on a daily basis, CRH owns and operates over 15,000 trucks internally. Nearly a third of those are operated by a skilled union workforce. I can tell you firsthand that the driver shortage is real. There is absolutely no question about it. Today, CRH alone needs to hire another 1,000 truck drivers just to maintain current demand, just to keep up. With this shortage, it is more critical than ever to ensure we have resiliency in the trucking pipeline. As Congress begins to work on the next highway bill, and we're really excited about that, by the way, There are policies that the Shippers Coalition is united behind that would not only improve our supply chain, but do so safely and without additional budgetary commitment. The Shippers Coalition represents more than 80 of our country's most prominent companies and trade associations in the manufacturing, food and beverage, and agribusiness industries. We are the ones who produce and provide goods and make sure you and your constituents can get them. We are also focused on improving the country's supply chains and increasing safety for everyone on the road. Congress should authorize a pilot program to modestly increase the gross vehicle weight limit on interstates from the current 80,000-pound limit up to 91,000 pounds while adding a sixth axle or the bridge formula, whichever is lower. Importantly, this proposal would be opt-in. It would also impose important conditions on participation, which would protect the public interest, including the addition of an extra axle, weight distribution requirements of the bridge formula, and per axle limits so that safety concerns are met. Today, many of our trucks are departing facilities with only 3/4 full. With an increase in GVW, we would see these trucks fill closer to capacity, meaning fewer vehicles on the road, fewer trips to accomplish the same task, and ultimately fewer miles in the system. Now here's the bottom line. Just like we cannot build projects the same way we did 40 years ago, we can also not govern the trucking industry the same way. The GVW limit has not been updated in over 40 years, and now is the time to do so. CRH and the members of the Shippers Coalition strongly supports the committee's efforts to improve trucking-related policies and the safety of our communities. We hope you consider the initiatives outlined in my testimony as you work on surface reauthorization and hope to be a part of the solution along with you. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Mr. Glessing, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am Dan Glessing, a fifth-generation dairy farmer from Waverly, Minnesota. My wife, Sina, and I, along with our 4 children, milk 70 Holstein cows and grow corn, soybeans, alfalfa, and oats on our family's farm. I am the president of Minnesota Farm Bureau, and I'm pleased to offer this testimony on behalf of Minnesota Farm Bureau and the American Farm Bureau Federation, which is the largest general farm organization in the country. The success of American agriculture relies on a robust, safe, and dependable transportation system. The products we grow and raise must travel far beyond our farm gates to reach markets, processors, and consumers. That journey begins on rural roads and bridges, which serve as a critical first link in our transportation supply chain. That is why Congress needs to consider common sense solutions that address our supply chain shortfalls by streamlining the process for hiring truck drivers, expanding safe parking opportunities, increasing truck weights, and allowing easier transportation of commodities within a 150-mile radius for drivers under the age of 21. A great example of the transportation policy on farmers all the way through the supply chain to the consumers has been highly pathogenic avian influenza, which has significantly impacted Minnesota poultry populations and diminished the national supply of eggs. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration issued an emergency declaration exempting hours of service regulations for commercial motor vehicle operations engaged in the emergency transport of live chickens. While this declaration was helpful, it can make an even greater point to the agricultural supply chain. The decisions that are made in this committee and regulatory burdens faced by agriculture have a direct impact on the price of food for consumers and the livelihood of farmers in Minnesota and across America. My testimony today will outline several key issues affecting our nation's agriculture industry and transportation infrastructure. The American Farm Bureau continues to support the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for its essential investments in our nation's infrastructure. These investments will help keep U.S. agriculture competitive in the global market, which is all the more essential when, for the first time in many of our lifetimes, the U.S. has become a net food importer. Ensuring that our farmers and ranchers have access to reliable transportation infrastructure is more critical now than ever. The National Highway Trust Fund is the backbone of our transportation infrastructure, providing crucial funding for the maintenance and improvement of roads and bridges in rural communities. However, the fund faces long-term sustainability challenges. Farm Bureau supports increasing Highway Trust Fund fees to reflect the advancements in fuel efficiency, and rising inflation. We also advocate for ensuring that all road users, regardless of fuel source, contribute fairly to the fund's revenue. Investments in roads and bridges must not only address urban congestion, but also the unique needs of rural America. Over 46% of America's roads are rated as poor or mediocre, and over 10% of rural bridges are structurally deficient. When a bridge closure forces a farmer to take a 50-mile detour just to transport their grain to a local elevator, it's not just an inconvenience, it's a direct hit to their bottom line. I urge this committee work with the Farm Bureau to prioritize long-term sustainable funding solutions for the National Highway Trust Fund. Transportation regulations must also take into account the unique needs of agriculture. We are transporting live animals, and every additional stop or delay poses a risk to the health and safety. The IIJA recognized this by providing an exemption for livestock and insect haulers from hours of service regulations within a 150-mile radius of their final destination. We appreciate this committee's work in securing that exemption, and we ask for continued support to ensure regulations reflect the realities of agricultural transportation. In closing, I urge this committee to prioritize the needs of rural America as you consider transportation infrastructure investments and regulatory policies. By maintaining strong rural road and bridge funding, ensuring fair contributions to the Highway Trust Fund, and upholding necessary exemptions for agricultural haulers, we can ensure a sustainable future for American agriculture. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Scandalia.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Holmes Norton, Ranking Member Larson, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters represents 1.3 million hardworking people in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico, including more than 600,000 members who start their day behind the wheel. Per the title of today's hearing, one of the most significant ways the Teamsters support American communities is by securing strong contracts with good wages and benefits to support our members and their families. Further, companies big and small across the company rely on the Teamsters to keep their businesses running. I'm proud to be joined here today by 5 Teamsters drivers representing Local 639 operating the DMV area. We come before you today at a critical moment as the committee begins its work on surface transportation reauthorization, an important opportunity to improve roadway safety, increase the quality of life for workers in the trucking industry, foster responsible innovation, and strengthen American infrastructure. We commend members who have sponsored or co-sponsored trucking policy that the Teamsters have been proud to endorse and which passed into law last year, including the Veteran Improvement Commercial Driver's License Act and the Transportation Security Screen Modernization Act, as well as legislation we hope to see enacted, including the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, led by Representative Bost, the Trucker Bathroom Access Act, led by Representative Nels, and the Guaranteed Overtime for Truckers Act, led by Representative Van Drew. It is our expectation that conversations surrounding the supply of truck drivers will be of substantial interest to the subcommittee. To that end, we reiterate in the strongest possible terms our position that we reject the notion of a driver shortage. In this room, industry has come before you for 20 years to suggest that there is a mass shortage of truck drivers across the nation. But research, including the Bureau of Labor Statistics and recent analysis from the National Academy of Sciences, simply doesn't agree. In that regard, we encourage the committee to consider the annualized turnover rate at large truckload carriers are consistently and shockingly in the 80 to 90% range, as opposed to between 10 and 15% for less than truckload Teamster carriers. Meanwhile, at UPS, the time between becoming a package car driver in local delivery and a position opening up to become a feeder driver operating a UPS tractor trailer may take years. With strong benefits in the protection of a union, we experience the opposite of a driver shortage. We encourage the committee to consider the root causes of why the pipeline for drivers elsewhere is damaged. With that said, the Teamsters are at the forefront of developing high-quality CDL holders. Across the country, we operate first-in-their-class CDL training schools at low to little cost for students. We believe the Teamsters program offers a model CDL training, and as a subcommittee considers the issues of driver supply, we hope to work with you to find ways to bring our expertise in training the safest commercial truck drivers to more of your constituents to provide more opportunities for prosperous careers in the trucking industry. The committee will also be tasked with addressing safety issues in trucking. On that note, the Teamsters adamantly oppose efforts to raise maximum truck weight. Simply put, these proposals threaten safety, increase wear and tear on our nation's roads, and add unnecessarily operational difficulties for our drivers. Putting our members behind the wheels of heavier vehicles when all safety analysis agrees with our professional experience is simply putting them and members of the public in harm's way. The Teamsters also oppose efforts to modify hours of service protections, to increase drive time or duty windows, or to provide unwarranted flexibility to extend or waive hours of service protections. We also urge the committee to consider how structural changes in trucking may affect the ability of existing safety systems to account for them. In particular, this includes companies like Amazon deploying mass contracted fleets to evade oversight by FMCSA's Compliance Safety Accountability Program, as well as shifts to non-regulated under 10,000-pound vehicles for last-mile delivery. The testing and commercial deployment of autonomous trucks has only continued since the passage of the IAJA, and yet we have failed to enact any kind of meaningful federal oversight over the testing and deployment of these vehicles. The committee and subcommittee maintain critical jurisdiction over several elements of autonomous vehicles, particularly in trucking, and we hope to work with you to develop statute and regulations in surface reauth which prioritize safety and the trucking workforce. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters thanks the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today. We look forward to continuing to work together on a bipartisan basis on the upcoming service transportation reauthorization. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman and thank every member of the panel. Appreciate your testimony very much, very helpful and insightful as well. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Lindsay, I'm going to start with you. You know, when a lot of us here and on this committee have dealt with natural disasters. Natural disasters are very traumatic in a number of respects and in every regard. Can you speak a bit about carrier partnerships with states to address road closures, truck weight exemptions, and hour of service adjustments to expedite the delivery of supplies?
Yes, sir.
You know, when a disaster hits, most people are without, and they need as much help as they can get. So I'd love for you to expound on that.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's been a tough year for a lot of your districts, a lot of your states, for a lot of our employees, whether it's Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Mississippi, or California. It's been a hard year, and we've seen loss that's been really tough to handle. Normally, we're absolutely supportive. And unfortunately, we have too much experience with dealing with disasters the last few years and what that means to get communities rebuilt. We're absolutely supportive in these waivers. Remember, we're building roads and bringing materials in so that a lot of critical supplies can then get to folks, right? So we're oftentimes the first in. Like we were in Asheville on I-40 when it washed out, we were called on first to rebuild a roadway. So waiving those requirements, having some leniency on the hours, it absolutely helps things open up faster. So thank you for your question.
Mr. Glusting, truckers hauling livestock and perishable goods face unique challenges on the road, obviously. American Farm Bureau has long advocated for targeted flexibilities for these drivers. And in 2020, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration provided some relief for short haulers. So as we look at opportunities to right-size regulations as part of this package, are there any federal regulations impacting those hauling livestock or perishable agriculture commodities that we should examine more closely than others?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Mr. Chairman. We do appreciate the flexibilities that we've experienced in the past, but taking a look at that 150-mile exemption when you get out in some rural areas, especially when you're livestock or perishable products, maybe taking a look at lifting that or expanding that further would probably be top of mind on that subject, just because when those cows and crops can't wait, and so we need to get those to where they need to go. Thank you.
You know, one of the big problems that we have in North Carolina is you got all these big trucks on the back roads, and those roads aren't you know, really designed or made for that type of traffic. Can you comment on that any, or you, Mr. Lindsay?
I absolutely can comment on that. We have that problem in a number of states, not just the great state of North Carolina. Being able to move, that's why we propose a GVW increase, going from 80 to 91,000 pounds. If we can move those heavier loads off of the state and locals onto the interstate that was constructed in a manner to handle that better, it's better for the traveling public, and it's better from a safety standpoint.
For time's sake, I'm going to move quickly to Mr. Elliott. Your organization, or given that your organization is a registered safe driver apprenticeship program sponsor, can you talk about your experience with that a little bit? And then a follow-up to that, too. I'm just curious, from your standpoint, How big a problem is marijuana use in terms of supply of drivers?
I think it's unfortunately going to be a bigger and bigger problem as more states move to legalize and classify it. Again, I think it goes back to testing. I don't think anyone in this room wants somebody behind the wheel who's impaired. We lack current technology comparable to a breathalyzer. So I think the number of incidents or things that are involved with marijuana is much greater than what anyone realizes yet until we have that technology and our officers on the road have that technology. So I think it's only going to get worse.
The Registered Safe Driver Apprenticeship Program, can you talk about your experience with that?
I think that it's a study that is needed. You know, we had a gap between graduating high school and then 3 years later, so you could enter the trucking industry. So we became the career second choice. I think much like when I was in the military, we operated very large tanks and other equipment, and that was done with proper training, proper discipline, proper mentorship, proper equipment and with the safety technology behind it and with proper training, I believe that we can do that on our America's highways.
Well, and attracting young people early, I think, is important too. Having grown up working on a farm during the summers, I was trucking a lot of things probably before I was supposed to.
Much the same.
Mr. Scandalia, Mr. Elliott, and Mr. Pugh. Each of you addressed the issues with increasing truck size or weight limits in your testimony. Collectively, your organizations represent the drivers and carriers tasked with safety and responsibly transporting goods. A majority of the witnesses here today are staunchly opposed to proposals that put lives at risk. Why is it important to reject proposals to increase truck size or weight limits?
First of all, my colleague here to my left said he has a hard time finding drivers. If we raise these size and weights, it's going to get even worse. We've interviewed drivers, and there's been surveys out there back to 2022 where truckers said it would make their job 68% more difficult, and 87% said it would make the roads less unsafe. So this is a safety thing as well. I'd also remind folks that earlier this year, there was a hearing here, and Home Depot admittedly said that once you increase the rates, it's fine, but we're not going to pay the drivers anymore. Drivers are already not making enough. Also, there's a huge investment in this equipment that these folks can't afford, or what happens is they buy this equipment, and all the equipment that they have just ends up sitting out back somewhere, like it's a junkyard or whatever.
Ranking Member Norton, we've talked in this hearing room a number of times about some of the statistics as it relates to heavier trucks. The DOT Comprehensive Truck Size and Weight Limit Study as an example. But I'd like to take a step back and point out that between the Teamsters and Mr. Pugh's organization, we represent the vast majority of truck drivers in this country. And so when this subcommittee thinks about truck weight, we encourage you to think about the perspective of the actual drivers, again, represented by us, represented by OIDA, who are coming here to tell you that increasing truck weight is making our workplaces less safe.
The trucking industry is a little divided on this issue. LTL is a very small segment who endorses larger. There are some segments that endorse heavier. As an industry, truckload is by far the largest segment, and we adamantly oppose both. And it comes down to a couple simple things. One, safety. Bigger, heavier, longer does not represent safer in any way. And the bottom line is our bridges on the 2025 infrastructure report, bridges were rated D+. C. Our roads were rated a D+. So there's nothing that in conjunction with heavier and longer that does anything to rectify that. Modifying the equipment or replacing the equipment would simply put many, many trucking companies, especially small trucking companies, out of business. It's financially uneconomical, and the money could be much better spent on safety technology and things like that we can put in place today. The trucking industry spends 1.2, I'm sorry, we spent $14 billion on safety enhancements in 2022. So we're very committed as an industry to safety.
To each of the three of you, would average Americans see any benefits from heavier trucks, or would they simply pad the profits of a few corporate interests?
In my opinion, no, because we'll have the continued safety numbers and accidents will continue to go up, because again, this is a safety thing. These trucks are gonna take longer to stop, they're bigger, they're heavier, they're gonna tear up the roads worse. We're gonna see our infrastructure destroyed, so it'll be the opposite effect. And the person who's gonna lose the most on this is the American trucker or the small fleet owner. I personally hauled steel for many years in Ohio, and what would happen was when you would haul permit loads, like for Worthington Steel, they would cut the rate on the permit loads because you were hauling more weight, the stuff paid by the weight. And I think it was said earlier that these trucks are on secondary roads a lot, and I understand that. But part of the reason they're on secondary roads, that's not gonna change because that's where they pick up and deliver the freight. So they're still gonna be out there on these secondary roads. We're not gonna change that.
I think it would be a great appeal to the trial lawyers. More accidents, bigger, heavier trucks. Which in the end trickles down and costs the consumer to pay every one of those lawsuits. So no, I do not think it would help.
And from our perspective, whatever benefits are being touted here will be far outpaced by the harms caused to drivers, the risks of accidents, and the damage to our infrastructure.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for putting together this panel that can give us some advice and also support what we're trying to do. Mr. Elliott, how would the creation of a private investor-funded federal infrastructure bank supplement existing funding tools? Can't hear me? Can you hear me now? You hear me now? How would the creation of a privately funded infrastructure bank in the states, each of the states, supplement existing funding tools that would provide infrastructure needs to benefit the trucking industry? How would that benefit you?
That's a little tough one for me to answer. I'm not familiar with the particular structure you're speaking of, but I think as an industry, we support funding. We would support fuel tax increases as long as that money is going directly to the roads and bridges.
Well, this would be private money invested.
Okay, I do not believe in tolling. It's a highly inefficient. The amount of money that goes for administration versus goes in to the roads is very, very unequitable. Where the current fuel tax system, only 1% is going to administration. It's a workable system with 99 cents on every dollar collected going to right where it needs to go. When you privatize that is not the case. I don't remember the exact numbers. I think it's 30, 40% or more. I believe it's more, but I don't want to misquote. Goes to the administration side. So we do not consider it to be a logical or viable option for our industry.
Mr. Gleason, do you have a comment about it?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't know enough about it to answer, fully, but certainly when we look at trucking and getting the goods to where they need to go, we need to explore options with the roads and bridges the way they are, especially in rural areas. We need to explore options. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Elliott, what steps do you think Congress should take to ensure federal infrastructure funding maximizes its impact and hopefully minimizes waste and inefficiencies?
Again, I go back to, I think, our current fuel tax system. The system itself is a good system, engineered well. It's time to update it. It has not been tied to inflation. It has not been, we have the EPA, which is mandating better fuel economy, which is great, but every time we hit that new level, we automatically reduce the fuel tax money coming in, and we continue to deplete the Highway Trust Fund. So I think we need to put together some logical mechanisms that keep that in check and keep that in balance. And obviously, you know, we're running deficient. I mean, the IIJA helped to put a lot of money in infrastructure, but it really was helping to offset the money that wasn't in the Highway Trust Fund that should have been there, and the mechanism that should have been repairing those roads and building those bridges and doing those things. So I think we really need to get back to our core system and fix it.
Okay, Mr.
Combined with an electric vehicle, you know, system, because as that continues to grow, we have to look at how we offset that mechanism as well.
Tolls affected by electric vehicles, right?
I'm sorry, what?
Tolls are paid by electric vehicles, is that correct?
Yes, yes. On the states that have toll roads, yes, that would equivalent there.
Mr. Pugh, do you have any comments about that subject of?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. As far as my members in trucking, we support the fuel tax, and that's all we would like to see as far as trucking. I agree with what Mr. Elliott said. It's fair, it's equitable, it works, it's been working for years. We need a fair, equitable raise. If we're going to raise it, it needs to be fair and equitable between cars and trucks. But for far too long, we've seen our highway trust fund depleted with highway beautification projects and bicycle trails and all these different things like that that don't help transportation or help trucking. I mean, we'd love to see some of this money reallocated to truck parking in the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act. I mean, that's, highway safety is what we're all here for, and a good night's rest for an American trucker is probably the #1 thing we can do for safety right off the get-go. But yeah, we do not want tolls. Tolls are unfair. As a small business trucker who used to truck to the East Coast, I spent $11,000 to $12,000 every single solitary year for one truck on tolls and on the East Coast. So tolls are by far unfair. I'm sure the GW Bridge was paid for many, many moons ago, but you're still paying over $100 to drive across it.
Thank you very much. My time's run out, so I yield back.
Ms. Sykes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Norton, for holding this hearing today. I think we have already solicited a lot of great information that we can consider as we continue this work, especially with our reauthorization this year. As many of you know, I am a member from Ohio, and I always like to talk about that we are the heart of it all. That is our state's motto. Also, we have over 49,000 center lane miles, and you can get to a significant part of the United States population in just a day's drive from Ohio. So we are very unique in geography and getting across this country. And I know that trucking is a major part of moving goods across the country through our state. And so I am a strong believer that truck drivers are the lifeblood of our nation's commerce, moving these essential goods across the country from coast to coast every day. And I thank them for the work, and all of you for the work that you do, ensuring that these goods can make it to people and we can increase our quality of life. But certainly trucking is not an easy job, and sometimes it's not the most safe job in America. And in the first half of 2024, we've seen many people killed in traffic crashes involving large trucks, and although it has declined, we certainly have a lot more work to do. Fortunately, policies in the bipartisan infrastructure law continue to provide critical funding to communities across the country and ensure that America's infrastructure remains in working condition to support the needs of the American people. And we have seen this in Ohio's 13th district with some resources for local bridge projects, critical infrastructure in particular that needs to be replaced. But I know that our local governments and sometimes our state governments just don't have the resources to do it on their own. Mr. Scandaglia, can you talk to us a little bit more about the bipartisan infrastructure law and how has some of the funding increased trucker safety, not only for the drivers, but the public at large?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. The IIJA and the money we invested in our infrastructure has been substantial. The projects you mentioned are good examples of that. I believe the bill did somewhere in the area of $40 billion for bridges. So we have made substantial progress by having a bold bill. But unfortunately, there is a lot left to do. We hear a lot in this, the phrase crumbling infrastructure, but for our drivers, it's crumbling workforces, or crumbling workplaces, I'm sorry. So there's a lot left to do. We've made good progress, but we hope to build on that in the upcoming surface reauth.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the issue of truck size and weight. And I know we've heard a lot about that from the testimony here. And I have in the past year, well, not even year, a couple of weeks, received a significant amount of outreach from local elected officials, specifically resolution from the city of Akron, letters from Monroe Falls and Macedonia, raising concerns about increasing truck limits. And I know this conversation will be one that we will go back and forth on quite a bit, but I do want to hear a bit more from you, Mr. Lindsay, about your perspective and why we should increase it. And then Mr. Scandaglia, I know you may have a different perspective and why we should not. So if we could dig into that a little bit deeper, Mr. Lindsay, and then continue.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Sykes. Appreciate the question. First of all, safety is our #1 priority, but we've got to be as efficient as we can moving goods. And when most of our trucking happens in a last mile scenario, so we're utilizing every mode of transportation that we can on a CRH side. So Shelley Materials in Ohio, it's impossible for us to do anything else but truck that last mile to a customer or to a job site, right? And we love that. But leaving a yard with 3 pallets on a flatbed versus 4 or 5, depending on the weight, makes no sense. So for us, it's efficient. And we also have data we can supply to this committee. We've supplied in the past that shows adding that 6th axle is a greater, one more point of contact. So you're spreading instead of 80,000 over 5, we're spreading 91 over 6, right? I'm not a mathematician, but those are better numbers. And the truck shows to stop a foot or 2 sooner than with a 5 axle. So safety is our #1 concern. We would not be a part of something that was not safe.
Thank you.
From our perspective, we look at, again, I mentioned a little earlier, the Department of Transportation study that found heavier trucks had a 47 to 400% higher crash rate than 80,000-pound trucks, and that those trucks also had substantially higher out-of-service violations and brake violation rates. So we think that there is data that demonstrates a real safety problem here. But again, I think the most important message I can deliver on truck weight is the perspective of our drivers, who know what this would look like for them and tell us that they don't want to be put behind the wheel of those vehicles.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time for the question, but if I may, if the waivers I know we have in Ohio, for example, may be helpful, and perhaps we can talk offline about whether or not the waiver process is efficient for addressing your needs, Mr. Lindsay, but also keeping folks safe. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Bost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pugh, I'd like to start by asking you some questions, if I could, about truck parking. Obviously, we're always concerned about wasteful spending here, and as we should be, and here, when dealing with federal government and the way we spend the money. But with regard to Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, what would you say to lawmakers that are more concerned about the money that's being involved for the parking and what the advantages of spending that money would be compared to not?
Thank you for the question, and yes, I understand everybody's concerned about spending money. I have a huge concern about money being spent in Washington as well. We want money spent on good things that give us good results. As I said earlier, if we're really concerned about safety, first thing and most important thing is the driver should have a safe place to rest every single solitary night. We're at a place in this country where there's one safe spot for every 11 trucks. I'm sure Mr. Boss is well aware of the accident that happened just north of his district on I-70 last year when a trucker was illegally parked on an exit ramp and was rear-ended by a Greyhound bus at 3 in the morning. Unfortunately, that trucker was left with no choice where to park. Every day in this country, every single solitary day, truckers are left with the decision of one, to either park early and take money away from themselves and their family because they are paid piecework and by the mile, the most of them. So they either park early at a safe place, or 2, they try to roll down the road and find a safe spot before they run out of hours, because they're governed by hours of service, and hope to find a safe spot. And then if they don't, they're left with 2 choices. Either they continue to drive and break hours of service and be in violation and can receive a ticket, or 2, they park in an unsafe place and pray to God that they wake up the next morning without anything happening to that buster. So what we need to do is reallocate some money. We put plenty of money into enforcement and other things to rate these drivers violations for breaking hours of service. So I think we could probably reallocate a little bit to give them a safe place to park.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott, in your testimony, you said that 70% of drivers have had a violation of service hours because they're searching for parking. And I would like you, if you could expand on that, because many people, look, you all know that I was born and raised in the trucking business. And the hours of service, I've said this so many times, we don't want to go back to the 1970s and 1980s where you can use 3 logbooks and drive 24 hours a day. We don't want to go down that path. But with the electronic logbooks now, you all of a sudden, if you don't have a parking spot, you're going to violate your hours of service. Can you kind of explain that to the people?
It's very much like this countdown clock. That is exactly what the drivers, the stress that they are under behind the wheel. Trying to find a parking spot, watching that yellow and watching that turn red, and having to make decisions. And it's very stressful. It's a stressful job. You want them to rest. You want a well-rested driver on the road next to you and your family. You do not want a driver who's stressed out. And we create an environment that, by no one's fault, you know, it happens, but we need to increase the flexibility for the drivers, and that they're professional drivers. If they need 15 minutes to get to a safe spot versus make a decision to park somewhere, I would rather them take that 15 minutes. I think everyone would. You know, so the system needs to be looked at there. But again, we have to go back to the root cause of we build warehouses, we don't buy parking. We continue to expand, we don't put parking. You drive down most major highways, you see rest area after rest area closed to save money. So we're our own worst enemies. We take away the parking. We should be funding those, getting them back open. And that, because, you know, it's not popular in the local municipalities to build truck parking, but our highway infrastructure has a lot of opportunities that we could very quickly reutilize in that.
All right, I want, Mr. Elliott, if you would, I'm going to stay with you on this, but you brought it up a little bit. All of the states now that are legalizing marijuana and the issue that we deal with in the trucking industry, and it's not just the trucking industry, it's heavy equipment, it's pilots, it's all, you know, alcohol, we do have a way to say, okay, you're in, we breathalyzer test. The marijuana situation is you smoke one joint and you're going to be popping positive for 30 days, and we don't have the way to actually keep it controlled and safe because we don't have the proper testing. Can you expand on that issue as well, please?
In my 12 seconds, yes. As much as the only tool we have right now that's better than what we have is hair follicle testing. We're allowed to use it on one hand, but we're hiding the results from our own industry and from the public and from the federal government. And we need to remove that roadblock as quickly as possible if we want to make the roads safer. We need to quit talking about it, and we need to move forward. It's been 10 years.
Thank you. My time expired. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Figures, recognized.
Mr. Elliott, that was the most efficient use of 12 seconds. I'm over here. That I have ever seen. We need to get you on a football field for the 2-minute drill. Well, first of all, I know a few of you have served in the military, so thank you guys for your service to this country, and thank you guys for your service to this economy and the professions that you guys have taken up. My brother is a trucker, so I know firsthand, well, secondhand, I guess, some of the struggles and some of the issues facing your industry. So I'm really thankful for you guys being here to discuss them. If we could go down the line real quick, because most of you guys sound like all of you guys sound like no nonsense, straightforward, call it how you see it type guys. As we're approaching this reauthorization, if there's one thing that you say, guys, we got to fix this and we got to fix it this year, what is it? I know I'm asking you to pick your favorite kid right now, but
I'm gonna break your rule and go with 2.
Okay.
Truck parking and the drug testing, I think are the 2 biggest must-dos now that can be done.
Mr. Pugh.
Truck parking and driver training.
Funding certainty. Predictable, dependable, real funding certainty. It affects everybody that's on this panel. And then how can we do things more efficiently? If it's proper truck parking, if it's increases in GVW, absolutely. It starts with proper funding and adequate funding with all resources available. The cliff we're facing, we can't start turning down options before we've gotten there. You can't turn down a job you haven't been offered yet, right? It's going to take everything to get us there.
I would say adequate funding as well, and whatever mechanisms it takes to get there. Obviously, rural areas are crumbling quite dramatically, and to get funding for those roads, bridges, obviously increased weights, we can talk about that later, but funding.
Yeah, I'll repeat some of my panelists' perspectives. I think new looks at how we do driver training and partner with organizations like ourselves, as well as addressing the persistent problems in the Highway Trust Fund.
All right, thank you, guys. The driver shortage issue is certainly one that rings true for my district, especially when we look at the ability of this industry to create jobs, right? And these are, they certainly can be very good paying jobs to help people elevate out of poverty. I come from a district that's one of the poorest in this country. Individual median income in my district is just above $30,000 per person. Certainly one of the poorest districts here. Largely minority district, but about 50-50, but in those impoverished areas, there's an increase in minority representation there, and I know that in the state of Alabama, a lot of minority, particularly African Americans, choose the trucking route. But we're still having challenges recruiting them into the industry and retaining them in the industry. So in our rural areas specifically, what can we do better? What can we do better to drive people into your industry? What are the barriers that we can remove specifically for you guys to be able to get into those rural areas where the need for jobs are more pressing in a lot of cases, just given the high levels of poverty that we have and the roadmap that this industry can provide for people out of poverty?
I hate to beat a dead horse, but I'm going to go back to parking. Again, even in urban areas, the parking situation with trucks is even worse. A lot of drivers will try to get their truck close to home to be able to go home, and that's a very big challenge. You have to park an hour outside of the metropolitan area, and on the truck parking area, when you look at trying to increase the amount of drivers, and that one of the biggest demographics that is growing is women in trucking, and you know what? Women need and deserve, just like everyone does, but even more so, well-lit, safe parking, for their comfort to be able to find the industry more attractive and to feel good. I mean, nobody wants to go into an industry where you feel unsafe.
Okay, Mr. Pugh, and then I want to jump down to the end to Mr. Scandaglio. But you, Mr. Pugh, first. Same question.
Yeah, I think it's a multitude of things. Parking is one of the problems. I do want to make it clear, there's a shortage of experienced drivers out here because we have a turnover problem. There's 400,000 to 500,000 new CDLs issued in this country every year. So there's plenty of people's coming. They're just not staying. We got over 90% turnover rate, so we can't have a shortage if we got 90% turnover rate in this industry. The problem is they don't stay because of one, parking, like I said, trying to figure out where they're going to sleep every night. Who wants to do that? Pay. Average trucker, like $50,000 or less. They work 60, 70 hours a week. They're exempt from overtime. That's like less than a $15 an hour job to be at home over 300 nights away from your family, all these things. Now we're talking about raising weights and making the job tougher, but not paying them. We need to pay these people, and then we don't train them. There's a place in Missouri you can get seated on 24 hours. How's that safe? We need to make the entry-level driver training program much more aggressive with real hours and real time behind the wheel so these people are trained and trained correctly to be professional. And until we take the time to invest in our drivers and all these things, we are going to continue to lose people from this industry.
Thank you. I see my time has expired.
Mr. Owens.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Rouser and Ranking Member Norton, and our witnesses today. Thank you for this hearing and opportunity to discuss how this committee can improve and enhance the lives of the hardworking truckers. These are the Americans that are backbone of our interstate commerce and both literally and metaphorically the driving force of Americans' economic might. American truckers represent in many ways the American dream. The opportunity to be your own boss, an emphasis on self-reliance, a shot at owning your own business, and hitting the wide-open American road. However, this way of life has been threatened by overregulation, traffic congestion, no place to park, and skyrocketing operational costs. In Utah, these issues are facing a critical moment as our state moves forward with an innovative and transformative inland port. This project will cement Utah's historic role as the crossroads of the West by streamlining the movement of goods by integrating rail, truck, and air freight while reducing reliance on coastal ports. However, the project will increase freight volume, highway traffic, and demand for parking spaces. To support projects like this in Utah and across the country, we need to get reauthorization of our nation's surface transportation programs right, and truckers will be key to our success. Mr. Pugh, how many, like many small businesses owners around the country, I know truckers are being crushed by federal regulations. What is the, I think you might have mentioned before, but what is the number one reform that will maintain trucking as a pathway to the American dream?
I apologize. What was the, I didn't hear your complete question.
What would be the number one reform for that will maintain trucking as a pathway to the American dream?
I think the number one thing would be start paying truckers. Again, they're exempt from overtime since 1938. Congressman Van Drew introduced the Got Trucker Act to take that away. Truckers were paid for all their time. Our average long-haul trucker gives away 20, 30 hours a week sitting at a shipper or receiver waiting to be loaded or unloaded, and most of them never receive anything for that. I mean, who wants to give away their time? I ask that all the time. Do you want to go to work and sit around for 3 hours before you start getting paid? I doubt it.
You mentioned, I think I heard this right, you say 90% retention? What was the number percentage of?
Over 90% retention in the trucking industry, mainly the long haul. If you look at LTL and private fleets, they have a very low, but in the long haul sector, it's about a little over 90% turnover rate in trucking, and that's the problem. They're coming in, but they're not staying because of all the ill treatment and things that go on in this industry. I mean, trucking is a great occupation. I love it. Trucking I'm here because of trucking. But it's changed so much, and it's getting harder and tougher, and drivers are getting so tired of nobody listening to them. Just like this parking deal. This is the third time it's been through Congress, and we haven't got it. And everybody knows we need it. It's like, let's just have the intestinal fortitude to do it.
I have one of the questions we have time here. I've been alarmed as I've talked with truckers about the rapid freight fraud that's growing in my state and across the country. In your opinion, how can this committee best respond to confront this issue, Mr. Pugh?
Yeah, this whole freight fraud needs attack from many things. It exploded after COVID, and what we've seen is both brokers have had their identity stolen, truckers are getting their identity stolen, freight's being stolen. I mean, first and foremost is Ranking Member Norton has this bill out of the household goods. We need to get that passed because it'll require brokers to have a physical address, which truckers, companies have had to have forever. So we know where these people are, because it seems on the broker side, at least, these people are a lot of foreign entities. And then the other thing I would add, it gives FMCSA some teeth to go after these people, where they can file charges and stuff and civil penalties to these folks, which they lost, I think, in 2019. So both of those things would be the first and foremost. But FBI, FMCSA needs to start watching the NCCD Better, which is the National Consumer Complaint Database. Our members send these complaints there, and it seems like that's where all complaints go to die on this broker fraud. This is a massive problem in the industry.
Only have a few seconds left, Ms. Lindsay. Hope you can get this in. How can federal workforce development programs like the LCDL test waivers for veterans and other apprenticeship initiatives be leveraged to address the truckers' workers shortage?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your question. We are using every tool we have in creating some, if it's a second chance program or hire a veteran program, whatever it is, to try to get qualified drivers in the door. We've heard a lot about all these drivers, and I don't doubt my friends up here. I'm telling you today, we have 1,000 openings. And these are jobs that pay, and they're really not jobs. Shouldn't use the word jobs. You ought to use the word career, right? These are well-paid, big-time benefits. So I think they need to call us, and we need to hire some of these folks, right? So one of my big takeaways today, other than we need some truck parking, is that I need to get their cards, and they can come to work at CRH, because it's a great place to be, and we want to put them to work. Every program at our disposal, sir, we are trying to put in place to try to increase that pool of drivers.
Okay, thank you so much. You're back.
Ms. Brownlee, you're right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Scandaglia, it's a nice name. We've talked a lot about, a lot of people have mentioned areas where we can improve safety, particularly truck parking has been talked a lot about in this hearing today. But from a driver perspective, what can Congress do to help ensure safety?
Well, I think one of the most significant things that Congress can do is ensure that we have the ability to operate in safe workplaces, making sure that our drivers operate over bridges that aren't going to collapse, over roads that are in good shape. This is the roads, the interstates of this country are where our members come to work every day, and making sure that they can get from point A to point B safely is our top priority. And I think one of the most substantial things we can do in that regard is make sure that their workplaces are safe.
Great, thank you for that. And just to follow up on, driver shortages and careers, what else can Congress do to ensure careers in trucking are more desirable?
Well, I think one of the major things that Congress can do, again, in conjunction with entities who are offering driver training, is making sure that when drivers enter the industry, they're entering the industry in a way that is going to ensure that this is a career for them. Unfortunately, there are people who go to fly-by-night CDL schools. They get their CDL in 6 weeks. They show up to work, and it turns out they can't back into a dock. That's a problem. And that person is not likely to stay in the industry. So from Congress's perspective, I think there are things that can be done in the training sense. Unfortunately, at least for Congress, a piece of what we need here is private sector response. We need trucking companies to not look at employees as folks to just turn through the meat grinder and then we will replace them yet again when they quit. I appreciate Mr. Lindsay's comment, careers, not jobs. So we 100% agree in that regard.
Very good. And one last question, I think, to you again is, can you share more about the predatory truck leasing problem that you referenced in your testimony? And do you have any suggestions, again, for how Congress can help combat that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this actually gets back to what I was just discussing about how people enter the industry. Unfortunately, there is a phenomenon in which individuals are enticed to come work for companies. They're told, show up, you'll get your own truck, you'll be able to make all this money. And in some cases, they are induced into agreements that are unfair, that those folks don't fully understand when they ink their name on the paper. And there are unfortunately incidences of people who have fallen victim to predatory truck leases who end up working weeks and having a $0 paycheck. Because when they've paid the company back for the lease on the truck and the gas and the preferred maintenance provider and whatever it may be, their paycheck is $0. So we were proud to serve on the Truck Leasing Task Force Committee that the department put together. That report came out very recently, and we strongly endorse the recommendations of that report.
Thank you. And you mentioned also about predatory training and folks getting licenses and really can't drive a truck. Are those accredited so that people know where to go and where they're going to get the right training?
It can be very difficult for someone looking to enter the industry. Certainly, Motor Carrier maintains a list of its registered trained providers. But if you don't know anything about the trucking industry and you're trying to figure out how to become a truck driver, you may just show up at a school in your neighborhood or nearby that suggests that it advertises CDL training. And unfortunately, if you choose wrong, you could end up going to a CDL school that costs $10,000, doesn't impart actual driving skill, and then has no pathway to a real job. We think that we offer a very good training program. We're not the only one, but we like ours. But making sure that folks get pushed through the right channels so both they are safe drivers, good drivers, and that they stick around for a career is extremely important.
Is there any way to improve? It sounds like this is an issue and sounds like it's an area for improvement, whether there's even a rating system of some sort so that people will get directed to the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, Motor Carrier captures some of this information already, but unfortunately their resources are perpetually stretched thin, so their ability to deal with a report of an unsafe or predatory school is limited. But I think all extremely important conversations to have going into surface.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I read through the testimony of most of you, so I want to touch on a few things. Some of it I just want to comment. Some of it I want I want to ask you questions of. And I want to get started with infrastructure. Mr. Glessing, you put in your testimony about the IIJA, and I kind of want to take a little issue with it. You say you continue to support the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for its essential investments in our nation's infrastructure. Sir, you realize that the IIJA, less than 50% of that went to fix roads and bridges? The rest of it was for a green new scam? Not to mention that it didn't even address the real problem that's sitting out there with our drivers. And you also talked about more weight, and here's where I've got my question for you for hauling, which in essence you'd have to add an additional axle. Which how do truckers get paid for the freight they haul for the farmers? Is it by the mile, by the load, or by the ton weight?
Thanks for the question. Typically, when we're talking grain, that's by the bushel. And so
it's by whatever's put onto the truck.
Correct.
Well, and therein lies my problem, because that third axle is going to drag. You're not going to get any tire wear on it. You're going to get less fuel mileage. It's going to cost more money for the trucker to haul the products down the road, not your products. And I'm a firm believer we can haul more weight. Trucks are safer going down the road today than they ever were. But if you're going to haul it and the shippers are not going to pay more, you're just going to put more truckers out of business. The only people that are going to benefit are the shippers. And so I encourage you, please, when you're out there talking about it, make sure that you distinguish that y'all get paid by the ton weight mile. Mr. Elliott, I'm glad to see the pushback on the new engine emissions standards that are being crammed down our throats. And for those of you who don't know, I'm in the trucking business. But these emissions are being crammed, and you don't have to look very far back to see that the last time that we had engine emissions forced on us and new engine changes, that we lost a very big engine manufacturer called Caterpillar that went out of business. I do want to make an additional comment for you on Federal Highway Trust Fund. Y'all are all talking about raising fuel taxes. Man, I hope the motoring public out there understands we pay FET tax on every unit that we buy, but we also pay FET tax throughout the life of that truck on tires. We buy tags annually, which continually go up. We pay federal highway use tax that has gone up over and over my lifetime. So we pay more fuel tax or more tax for roads that has continuously increased over the years, and what most people don't know. And with every time these engines change, we get less fuel mileage. I remember back in the 90s, I was getting 8 miles to the gallon. It went down to below 5 with new engine changes. So we're effectively paying more into the Federal Highway Trust Fund every time they make a change on us. You also mentioned the automatic braking. Here's my question. Have any of your members complained about ghosting with these automatic brakes? Do you understand what Are there the ghost effect, where the automatic braking just automatically jams the truck for no reason?
I can't say our members, on a personal experience, we've had it happen. I mean, I've had it happen in my car. I will say, I would not buy a new truck without AEB. When I look at the great overall benefit,
I would say this though, and I think this goes to your driver retention too. These are not perfected. As someone who has over 75 of them, with a number of them that are sitting on the back there because you can't get the parts to fix them, and you can't drive the truck without it if you put it on there. But my drivers have complained so much because when you're going down the road doing 60, 65 miles an hour, and bam, you almost hit the windshield, that'll make you think twice, and you didn't do anything except come up on a road sign or construction sign or a bridge.
I agree, but I have to say I still endorse them because I also find that drivers don't want to run into your office and say, ooh, that thing saved my butt today.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make note that 98% of the trucking companies out there are 10 trucks or less. They're mostly generational. And I haven't seen any talk about the number one rising issue out there that is most prevalent on most trucking companies, and that's insurance cost, going up across the board. And the reason they're doing that is because we've got runaway lawsuits out there, these nuclear verdicts, these out-of-control trial lawyers. No wonder nobody wants to get into this business. When you ride down the road and you see billboard after billboard of trial lawyers up there that say, big truck, big money. We also have a congestion problem, getting back to those roads in the IIJA. Truck drivers lose, on average, over 435,000 hours a year. It's costing billions for us to sit on the highway in traffic jams. And why? Because the DOTs in our states can't get permitted because it takes too darn long to sit there and wait on somebody up here to give them one federal decision. On average, it takes over 10 years to get new roads and bridges built out there. So I think when you're out there talking, focus on those things as well. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elliott, as you know, there have been discussions in the past about increasing the length of twin 28-foot trailers, adding 5 feet to each trailer. It's my understanding that these double 33-foot trailers were opposed by a number of large and small trucking companies. These trucking companies argued that because the double 33s have 24% greater cubic capacity, truckload carriers would be forced by shippers to replace their fleet of single 53-foot trailers with the double 33-foot trailers. Mr. Elliott, can you please explain TCA's current position on double 33s and how they would impact the truckload industry?
As an organization, we are opposed to them for a number of reasons. While their industry is divided, we do have sectors that support them. The safety ramifications are large. The percentage of accidents involved with double trailers is larger than the single 53-foot trailers. The out-of-service rate is also additionally higher. We do not have parking infrastructure for our current trailer system, let alone to go doubles everywhere. It is less drivers have the endorsement. It is less safe for the drivers, obviously, especially in bad weather, to be able to hook and unhook one of those trailers by themselves upon a delivery. Customers are not set up for them. And as well, the cost to retrofit or to switch over what has become our industry standard over the last 25, 30 years would put a significant number of companies out of business. So as an industry, we are adamantly opposed to it.
The Coalition Against Bigger Trucks Law Enforcement Board, made up of retired law enforcement leaders with over a century of combined experience, recently warned Congress about the increasing dangers posed by heavier and longer trucks. They highlighted a 50.8% increase in fatal crashes involving large trucks over the last decade and pointed to data showing that occupants of smaller vehicles fare the worst in these crashes, regardless of fault. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record the letter that the Coalition Against Bigger Trucks Law Enforcement Board sent to this committee in January, as well as the Coalition's policy memo on truck size.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Pugh, your testimony strongly opposed increasing truck weight limits, citing serious safety concerns such as increased braking distances, higher risks of overturning, and greater strain on braking systems. From your perspective as a representative of small and independent truckers, I should say, why do you believe that increasing truck weights would make our roads more dangerous, and what specific safety risks are being overlooked by proponents of heavier trucks?
Yes. First and foremost, I go to the drivers themselves. There's nobody who cares more about highway safety than truckers. And as I stated earlier, 68% of them think it'll make their jobs much more difficult. 84% think heavier trucks will make the roads unsafe. 85% think longer trucks will make the roads even more unsafe. I think truckers probably know the best about highway safety more than anyone. So that's the first and foremost. Be a huge added cost to this that small business truckers probably won't be able to handle. I remind folks that I hauled steel. I would gross out always before I cubed out hauling steel and stuff. I've hauled these heavier loads. There does take more skill, does take much more responsibility. You have to be much more on your game. And then the final straw is nobody wants to pay these people more to do this. I mean, we've heard it said in this room. You're going to haul this more weight and have to take this stress without any more pay.
Mr. Pugh, your testimony also emphasizes that in addition to reducing safety, increasing the size and weight of large trucks could adversely impact small trucking businesses. Can you explain how small businesses could be impacted by increases to truck size and weight?
Yeah, small business trucking, trucking in general is a very, very tight profit margin business, just like farming. There's not a lot of extra money out there. I tell people that it's a penny saved industry, not a penny made. And like I said, there's costs all the time. By doing this, you already have invested $150,000, $200,000 in a piece of equipment. And now all of a sudden, if we change the rule, because we saw this when we went to 53-foot trailers, we saw this when we went from 73, 280 to 80. All at once, this $200,000 piece of equipment you have is either obsolete, so you have to go out here and invest in more expensive equipment, or you spend $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 trying to add extra axles and these things that sound so easy to get yourself to where you can haul these loads. Because whether the shippers or the receivers need these trucks or not, they're gonna think they do. That's what happened when we went to 53 feet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also just want to point out briefly that increasing truck weights or lengths would change the economics and switch more freight from rail to trucks. And of course, we know that rails are much less polluting and much more energy efficient, and this would be exactly against the interests of the country. I thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Johnson.
I'm always a little bemused, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes we say that we're in a post-truth world. And listen, I get it. Politics and policy can be kind of a difficult business these days, but I still find myself a little dumbfounded by how much mischaracterization has gone on. Lots of rhetoric, but let's dive into the facts, because at some point this should still be a town where we govern on the basis of facts. Mr. Lindsay, I want to come to you first. Mr. Pugh indicated that nobody would pay more to drivers for hauling more weight. Let's get to specifics. How do you all compensate drivers?
Thank you, sir, for the question. Appreciate it. Thank you for your leadership last Congress on this bill that made sense. We compensate a number of different ways. We pay by the ton.
So wait a second, you pay on the basis of weight?
Yes, sir, we do.
When drivers carry more weight, they get paid more?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I think that was the answer to your question. We pay more. We also, where we use outside subcontractors and not internal, we also do RFPs on a regular basis, so that if someone wanted to go out and invest in that sixth axle so that they could have a greater return on that trip, we're also believe in this program to the point that we would let them reprice in a given window, and we will also participate in the upfront cost for that axle and for that equipment investment.
So, Mr. Lindsay, just staying with you for right now, the Coalition Against Bigger Trucks published a report last week. It was a work of fiction that would have made Stephen King proud, I think. It talked about the real damage that would be done to local bridges and local roads. Mr. Lindsay, I don't want to test you too much on a quiz about the 91.6 proposal that I've been working on the last couple of years, but does the pilot program that I've introduced, does that impose any requirements on local governments?
It doesn't impose. They still have jurisdiction over those local roadways, yes, sir.
So this bill has no impact on local roads and bridges?
No, sir. As a matter of fact, and I can speak to Texas specifically, we're running 84,000 off the interstate in Texas, and we are dodging every way in the world to stay off the interstate to haul that extra 4,000 pounds. So what we're doing is driving past daycares, past churches, past schools, instead of getting on an interstate and taking a shorter route.
So let's say we've got a state who has believed some of the concerns that Mr. Nadler has raised today about safety, not that are supported by the record, but let's say that they believe him nonetheless. Is there any state DOT, is there any state legislature under my bill that would be required to adopt 91.6?
No, sir. It's an opt-in program only.
Okay, and it's a pilot program, right? I mean, narrowly tailored to allow us to gain more data about what the reality is with higher weights and an additional axle. Is my understanding about that right?
Yes, sir. Then we process the data and we make a decision from there.
So, Mr. Lindsay, I just got to ask you, if this is not actually imposing any requirements or higher weights on any local bridge or local road, what would the point be of that report released last week?
You know, that's a really good question. In my mind, it's taking those heavier loads off of those local roads and local bridges that may be in worse disrepair, quite frankly, than an interstate structure.
So here's what I think I know. I think I know that when you're holding a weak, hand of cards. When the data that you believe doesn't actually win the victory, what you do is you try to erect a straw man. You try to tell people that local bridges are going to be damaged by a piece of legislation, when in fact that is provably, demonstrably false. It is an argument being advanced by people who know that they don't have the data to win the argument on a narrow pilot program, state opt-in, focused just on the interstate. Let's turn toward intermodal shift because we've had a boogeyman erected there as well. Mr. Lindsay, are you aware of how much reports have shown would actually happen in the intermodal shift space?
We are a Class 3 rail provider on our own. Right? So the notion that we're going to use less rail or this would allow us to use less rail is absolutely false. As a matter of fact, the rail companies now turn down business from us because they can't service us.
I asked one of my colleagues last week what they thought the intermodal shift of this bill would be. They said, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I've heard people concerned about it, 5 or 10%. Not 10%, not 5%, not 1%. The reports say that the intermodal shift would be 0.34%. Reasonable people can disagree on policy, but damn it, reasonable people should have to tell the truth about the real impacts of the legislative proposals before us. With that, Mr. Chair, I would yield back.
Ms. Hull.
Thank you. So this has been a really great panel to listen to. The trucking industry employs 1 in 16 Oregonians, and my son's a Teamster. So what you do is really important, and certainly our office has been focused on how we get more rest areas for truckers. It's absolutely critical, and I've talked to women in the trucking industry, and there aren't a lot, and women that would like to be in the trucking industry, but it's not safe because there's not a safe place for them to be. So happy to work with any of you on that. The industry lost 114,000 drivers over the last decade and needs to hire 1.1 million more in the next 10 years. And there's nearly 3 times as many commercial driver's license holders as there are trucking jobs. So what I want to touch on is, and Mr. Scandaglia, for you to start, why are so many drivers leaving? The annual turnover at large truckload carriers is 80 to 90%. And at Teamster carriers, it's just 10 to 15%. So why do you feel like that plays out differently?
Thank you for the question. What has been apparent for a long time is that work in the trucking industry, like work in most industries, behaves as we would expect a labor market to behave. And so when drivers are not adequately compensated, when the benefits that are provided to them are not sufficient for a driver to say, this is a career that I want, we can't be surprised that that driver doesn't stay. There's a number of other pieces that are part of this as well. Frustrations with things you've heard about today, like truck parking, issues like being induced into predatory truck leases is a problem. So there's a lot of things that may result in someone not staying in the industry. But I think for our members, we don't see that. Our members come to these jobs that pay them the wages that they're seeking, and they frequently tend to stay there for their careers. And so when we look at the rest of the industry who says, we can't hire anyone, we can't find anyone, broadly speaking, that's not the experience that we're having at our carriers.
Great. Thank you. I also believe that we need to expose more young people to trades in high schools. When we cut, because of budget cuts in the 90s in Oregon, we cut CTE. The average age of an apprentice was 19. It is now 27 because we put people either to college or just to go out on their own. So I would love to work with anyone on that. And then Mr. Elliott, coming back to impairment testing, we have people, as you said, smoked a joint 25 days ago, they're going to test positive, whereas somebody that went out and had on a bender for the weekend and slept 4 hours is more of an in danger because of the impairment. They have a bad reaction to their cold medicine, they're tired, whatever's happening. How do we focus on making sure that we're testing for impairment? And what role do you think the federal government should have in that?
You know, I think it's very difficult to real-time test. I mean, in a perfect world, that would be the great answer. I think the immediate need in our industry, and not just our industry, but on the roads, period, with the marijuana popularity or reclassification and adoption everywhere, is the technology to give officers, and whether it be DOT officers at scales, whether it be police officers in that, the ability to have an equivalent type technology to a breathalyzer for marijuana. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know where they're at in that process, but I really think that is something that is going to be needed much sooner than later with the way that our individual states are legalizing and adopting this.
Yeah, and I hear this from lots and lots of industries where they're saying, I don't want to exclude this part of my workforce when really they're not coming in impaired, but our testing has not kept up with the reality. So thank you for speaking to that, and I yield my time.
Mr. Babin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for being here for your expert testimony. Mr. Pugh, you know even better than I do that the federal mandate on ELDs, or electronic logging devices, was the most expensive mandate that Congress has ever forced onto the trucking industry. Just from hearing your testimony today, it's obvious to me that there are two issues that are at play. First, the ELD makers can self-certify and leave truckers out to dry when those devices don't hold up. And second, that components for these trackers are made around the world and oftentimes in adversarial countries. What's more is that these ELDs are hardwired into the truck itself. They can shut the truck down, start it up, even make it veer off course. Taken together, that paints a pretty grim picture of the level of trust that we have for these devices themselves. Mr. Pugh, truck drivers are some of the most patriotic Americans that I know. In fact, I used to be a truck driver myself. But as we saw in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, any vehicle can become a mass casualty weapon. Would you support a pause on the ability of ELDs to have such control over a vehicle until we get these security issues ironed out? And have I exaggerated with some of these, or are these just rumors that we're hearing about these things? Are they true? Are they not? Answer the question about a pause on ELDs.
Yeah, when it comes to ELDs, when they made the mandate, FMCSA made it so there's self-certification. What the problem is, if we've seen, and you're correct, this was one of the most expensive mandates ever on trucking. What's happened, especially for small business and even fleets, they've bought these things and then they find out later on that they didn't meet certification. FMCSA gets rid of them, so now a trucker who's invested hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in one of these units is having to buy another one. I have members who've bought 3 or 4 of these now through the thing. So it's time that FMCSA does start inspecting and certifying these things themselves to make sure they do what they're supposed to do, 110%. The other real issue, and there was even a report from FBI that said, some of the componentry and components in these things are made, as you said, in foreign nations, China, Russia, places like that. And there is a very huge security because they are, a lot of them, connected. There are some that can work on a cell phone and like that, but there are a lot of them that are connected right to the ECM of the truck. So that person knows where those trucks are, can know where certain shipments are. I mean, we know trucks haul everything from freaking bombs to water, so who knows what they'd have on, and they can find out. If they can't control the vehicle, they will at least know where the vehicle is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Pugh. I appreciate it. Now, Mr. Lindsay, it's good to see you, too. Regulatory compliance, as you know, is a massive burden on the trucking industry as a whole. What suggestions can you share from the perspective of the shippers on how Congress can right-size the regulatory burden while still maintaining safety standards?
Yes, sir. Dr. Babin, thank you for the question. Nice to see you. Nice to see you as well. Very simply stated earlier in our testimony, GVW increase. We're not talking about bigger trucks. We're not talking about longer trucks. We're simply talking about increasing the gross vehicle weight from 80,000 to 91,000 and adding that sixth axle. That's the regulatory hurdle that we have that would make us more efficient. It would eliminate 20% of our trips. We've also, we have data that we've supplied this committee in the past, and we'll do so again, that we can do that safer. We're currently doing it in Canada now with some fantastic union drivers in Canada that are operating those units now. Everybody seems very happy about those. So some of the data that's been cited relative to safety here is out of date. It cites one state. There were no fatalities. We will supply new data to this committee as we did last Congress when this bill passed this committee on a bipartisan basis that shows we can operate safely, increasing 11,000 pounds.
Okay, thank you very much. And real quickly, back to Mr. Pugh, the same question to you. What suggestions can you share from the perspective of independent drivers on how Congress can right-size the regulatory burden while maintaining our safety standards?
Yeah, I mean, we need to train drivers better, 100%, to get them so they're better and safer on the highways. And I think we need to make the barrier of entry into trucking a little bit higher to where all these people aren't becoming motor carriers as well. We've seen an influx, especially since COVID, of a lot of people becoming motor carriers who don't really understand the business, and we don't even know where they're coming from. I also would add that I think that DOT or FMCSA needs to do some research and studies on non-domicile CDLs, because it seems to open the doors to flood the gates from foreign folks coming in here. And from what enforcement tells us, some of them can't even speak English, and nobody seems to know who's getting these non-domicile CDLs. We've looked in this ourselves.
Thank you very much. I guess they didn't hear that President Trump signed an executive order making English the official language here. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Ms. Poe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we agree that the trucking industry is a critical component of our supply chain, as Americans depend absolutely on the service of truck drivers. But the supply chain is only reliable when we have an experienced, well-trained workforce and an industry that prizes safety. Unfortunately, the fatal truck crashes that are a sad reality right now in my state on I-80, the International Highway 80 and Route 208 and other highways around our district. So I'm interested in ways that we can make sure that drivers are better prepared and safer on the road. With that being said, let me ask Mr. Scandalia. Did I say that correctly?
Scandalia.
Scandella, okay, thank you for that. You state that training leads led by Teamsters local union training centers must prepare students to go to work rather than simply achieve licensure. Can you expand on that, please, and also provide us how additional training improves safety for drivers and others on the road?
Absolutely. So as my testimony stated, the schools that the Teamsters run are focused on the idea of not just making sure that someone can pass their exams and be handed a license at the end of the day. We are very focused on the idea that when you go through our schools, when you graduate, not only have you accomplished whatever the federal government has told you you have to accomplish, but in fact you are ready to be a truck driver and be a safe truck driver. Unfortunately, that is not how a lot of schools in this country run. We have effectively diploma mills in a lot of places where they'll rush you through as fast as humanly possible, and they don't really care what happens to you once you're out and once you've paid them. So we're focused on graduating good drivers, graduating drivers who are prepared for a job, and then connecting those drivers with jobs upon graduation. We have extremely high graduation rates compared to other entities in the space, and we feel confident that the drivers that we put on the road do an excellent job of keeping both themselves and the general public safe.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Pugh, in your testimony, you highlighted implementation of new entry-level driver training requirements as an important step in ensuring new drivers are better prepared for and safer for the road. For the roads. Can you please share how drivers' preparedness changed after those requirements were implemented?
Yes, thank you for your question. And yeah, drivers need to be prepared. I mean, we train to win. I mean, that's why we have the greatest armed forces in the nation, because we train them to win and train them for everything. We train pilots, we train all these people, but for trucking, it's just a matter of you pass a test and you get a CDL and you can go anywhere in this country. And you know, you take a kid who's 21 years old, who's never been out of Florida, and all of a sudden he's heading to the Rocky Mountains in January, we're probably setting ourselves up for disaster. During the entry-level driver training that was passed in, I think, 2015, we wanted regular out behind the wheel hours required, and that got cut out at the last minute. And, you know, we talk about that for the 18 to 20-year-old drivers, and they need mandatory. Well, so does somebody who's 45 and never drove a truck. I mean, they could have drove a Prius their whole life or something. So, I mean, highway safety, it all comes back to training and investing in these people. And if we have to train, yeah, there's going to be an added expense there. But that expense, it should be well worth it, because we hear all the time that, just like the ELD, that expense was going to save all these lives. Well, we know training saves lives. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I know that we only have like 30 seconds, so I'm going to ask you, Mr. Pugh, once again, what specific areas should the committee consider for the upcoming surface transportation bill to further improve upon these safety gains that you've talked about? Real quickly, we have like 15 seconds.
Parking.
Okay. Thank you. That was fast enough. Thank you so very much. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Weed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of our witnesses here today. Our topic is one that is near and dear to my heart and critically important to the state of Wisconsin, which has over 57,000 trucking companies, primarily small, locally owned businesses, and 77% of communities that exclusively rely on to move their goods. My business relied on trucking day in and day out to facilitate the delivery of fuel and merchandise, and I understand the important role that trucking plays in maintaining our supply chains and ensuring the timely delivery of a wide variety of materials and products. In Wisconsin, there are many examples where state legal overweight logging trucks must exit the interstate and travel on state and local roads. Meanwhile, the only thing that changes is the designation of the road as an interstate. Drivers encounter local two-way traffic, school zones, churches, and driveways, creating a higher risk of accidents. Mr. Lindsay, could you speak more about how the GVW pilot program would work to resolve issues like that?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your question. The majority of our states allow, to your point, more than 80,000 today, just obviously not on the interstate. They're on state and local roads, right? So they're traveling through neighborhoods, past churches, past schools. Our bill simply says, or our pilot program simply says, it's not a bigger truck, it's not a longer truck. We just want to move as much traffic as we can as possible onto the interstate system and off of those state and local roads. That is a much safer scenario for the traveling public and for those drivers.
So from a construction standpoint, why is the interstate system better suited to handle vehicles over 80,000 pounds?
It should be designed. Now, every DOT is a little bit different, right? But there's certain standards that the feds have mandated over the years. It should be designed to carry increased weights and handle those loads.
Mr. Glessing, farmers face unique challenges on our roadways between hauling perishable goods and transporting livestock. Can you detail how federal motor carrier rules account for these unique challenges?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the question. When you're hauling perishable products, you need to get there, and typically, when you look at those animals on that trailer, the rules need to be flexible in order to get them to the end goal of wherever they need to go. And when you look at rural areas, you have to travel a long ways to get them there, especially when you get out from metropolitan areas. There's a long ways in between cities and places where they need to go.
Are there any identified challenges Congress should, examine as we look ahead to the upcoming, the surface transportation reauthorization?
Well, certainly when you look at the 150 miles, expanding that would be top of mind on my list of things to try and help alleviate that hours of service issue.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Pugh, what challenges, from your perspective, do small and independent truckers, which is a lot of our truckers, obviously, what do they face in complying with federal regulations?
Yeah, first and foremost, is a safe place to park every night, because they are governed by hours of service. As Mr. Elliott said, they feel like they're playing beat the clock nowadays with the ELD and no flexibility in hours of service. And that's all trucking. I know it's very stressful and strenuous on them, but we also have to be careful with flexibility, because sometimes with flexibility becomes people take advantage of their time and stuff, waiting to load and unload. So that's a very fine line that we have to be very careful with. This fraud that's out there right now, small business carriers are really having a lot of trouble with that. No one seems to be listening. We need to get this Norton Holmes bill passed as soon as possible to try to slow some of the fraud down that they're seeing as well. And as far as employee drivers, again, I would go back to pay and making less than a living wage for most of the long-haul segment of trucking, working 60, 70 hours a week and not receiving overtime.
As far as, could you discuss legislative efforts this committee could consider to combat freight fraud?
Yes, Ranking Member Norton has a bill, the Household Movers Act, I think is what it's called. But what it does is it would give FMCSA the ability to go back and file civil penalties to brokers or that they don't have now. Also, it would make brokers have a physical address, something that trucking companies have had for a long time. And so that way, if a broker does this illegally, they at least know where to find them, because a lot of this is coming from people overseas, we're afraid.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Norton Holmes' bill is the household goods shipping customer bill. I'm a co-sponsor of that, and I agree with you. I think we need to get it passed. And just kind of building on that, something I've been concerned about is combating organized retail crime. We see so much of that. It's not just a one-off stealing a magazine anymore. It's a major organized crime, and the money is used for all kinds of nefarious reasons. I've got legislation on that, but I've also, as the ranking member of the Railroad Subcommittee, seen that it's cargo crime as well. Could you address how that impacts the trucking industry, or if it does, and what we might do to help give more authority to regulatory body to help you deal with that? Mr. Pugh or anybody, Mr. Lindsay?
Well, obviously, thank you, ma'am. And we're concerned about anything that affects our 50,000 employees, right? And you mentioned retail crime. That makes the cost of living go up for everybody. So we worry about that. From a rail standpoint, telematics is really important for us. And so being able to track our shipments. Now, the benefit that we have, we're sending a lot of cement and a lot of rock and sand, and most folks aren't in the market to steal a rail car full of rock, right? They don't have much to do with it after they fix their potholes in their driveway. So we don't face the same challenge that most retailers do. But I think instituting telematics and then everything we can do from this body to make what we're transporting more efficient, right? And I would go back to a GVW bill. If we're eliminating 20% of our trucks on the road to move the same number of loads, we're cutting down on those trips and make things more efficient.
So does the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration have authority now to help you with that telematics you were talking about?
You know, ma'am, I'm not an expert on that. I can get an answer for you, though.
Mr. Pugh?
Yeah, I mean, this is affecting brokers, this is affecting truckers and small business carriers, everybody. My members, what we're seeing is either The broker's identity is being stolen. Some of the major companies that we've heard of, they're tendering a load. These people steal their identity, tender the load to the trucker. The trucker delivers the load, sends the paperwork back into that person that they think's legit, and then they disappear and never get paid. And we see that happening. We see carrier's identity stolen. They go pick up a load for this the carrier with a stolen identity. They steal the freight. Then it comes back on one of our members or another trucking company's, their insurance, and they didn't even haul the load or know anything about it. What FMCSA needs to do, besides with the bill, and I appreciate you sponsoring, but they need to start paying attention to the National Consumer Complaint Database. That's where they tell us to file these complaints when we reach out to our members. And like I said earlier, it seems to be the place where all things go to die, because of whether it's this or a motor carrier making a driver do something wrong or whatever the problem that we send into there, nobody ever gets back to our members. And we also feel that they probably should change the name, because a lot of truckers, including myself, I didn't even know this existed until I went in the office at OIDA in 2018. And I never would have thought that the National Consumer Complaint Database is where a trucker or a trucking company goes, or a broker, to report this kind of fraud.
Thank you. Well, as we look at this issue, we need to be sure that we include retailers, trains, trucks, everybody that's being hit by this organized crime. So thank you for that. We talked a lot about the supply chain. I want to talk about the people who make it happen, the truckers themselves. Some of this has come up, but Mr. Scandaglio, could you tell us about current regulations like hours of service, how they help address driver fatigue and other things that make it difficult maybe to talk somebody into being a trucker or staying a trucker once they get there, so that they know that they're safe, protected, have good benefits?
Absolutely. I think the comment was made earlier that it's important that on hours of service, we don't go back to the 80s and 90s or later than that when we had a Wild West of fatigue protections. So absolutely, hours of service are a bedrock for our folks who should not be driving 14, 18, 20 hours a day. It's unsafe. And I think everyone more or less agrees on that. But being able to explain to our drivers, these are the federal regulations vis-a-vis how long you can drive, based on how long we think you can drive safely. And if an employer attempts to coerce you to drive beyond those limits in a way that violates regulation, we can protect you. And I think that's a comfort for our drivers.
Okay. Well, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much. Mr. Glessing, it's great to have a fellow Minnesotan before the committee again, and thank you for your testimony and your commitment to keeping America fed. And I would also like to welcome your wife here today, who's in the audience. It's great to have you here, ma'am. In your testimony, you mentioned that a 50-mile detour just to transport grain to a local elevator, it's not just an inconvenience, it's a direct hit to a farmer's bottom line. And I know you are familiar with the Highway 23 Coalition. Minnesotans are advocating for a 4-lane highway from I-90 in southwest Minnesota to I-35 in northeast Minnesota. Can you elaborate on what this would mean for the transportation of agricultural commodities and livestock that is important to small towns and rural areas in our greater Minnesota?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman. When you look at the economic activity that could occur from a project like that in rural areas, as well as getting those products to the market, efficiency, especially in peak times of the year when you're in agriculture, you have to go. And improving the infrastructure to get that done, this would just be one example of that. And not to mention the economic activity that creates when you're not taking the main roads, you're getting through without having to go through like the Twin Cities, for instance, to get there.
Exactly.
And helps the rural areas and would be an overall improvement to our rural economy in Minnesota.
I know, starting from northeast Minnesota, rather than going southbound on 35E and across 94, right through the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, you can go in a southwest location, or direction rather, and get right down to southern Minnesota to those farmers as well. That is, I think, as the Farm Bureau president, I think that that's the advocacy that needs to continue. It's going to help your bottom line, and I'm in full support of it, as you know, but it's going to help you greatly. I appreciate that. Mr. Pugh, many consider OOIDA members the backbone of the trucking industry, representing over 150,000 drivers in all 50 states who own and operate more than 240,000 trucks. I think we would all agree your members are vital to our supply chain and the economy, and I would be remiss if I didn't say my Chief of Staff's father is an independent driver. Like so many others across the country, they are a testament to hard work and perseverance, and like others, they are an example of a true small business working hard to make ends meet. Mr. Pugh, I understand that a survey you conducted found that it would be more difficult for your members to recruit and retain drivers if bigger trucks are allowed. Two questions. Can you explain why this would be the case? And can you explain your concerns about the financial impacts increased truck weights would have on your members?
Yes, and thank you, and I appreciate that. And thanks to your Chief of Staff's father for being a trucker. That's good. I hope he's a member of OOIDA.
Yeah, that's right.
And if not, time to call me. But with that being said, yes, our members are concerned, and we did do a survey. There was a survey in 2022 that 68% of truckers felt that it would be more difficult to drive or to handle longer or heavier trucks, first and foremost. These are the people doing it. Also, yes, these are harder to drive. You have to pay better attention. There's many more, it takes longer to stop. As I said in earlier testimony, I've done this personally for 20-some years, hauled steel in Ohio on overweight permits. And what happens constantly is you make this investment, you buy these permits, you buy this extra equipment, and you end up making less money because it takes more fuel, there's more wear and tear on your equipment, your tires, your brakes, everything, when you haul longer and heavier. And then, as I said before, a lot of times what happens, the companies cut the rate on you for lesser for these permit loads. That's the real story here, and that's the real world. I've done it and seen it myself, and I have many members who have too. 80,000 has worked, and you can say it's outdated, but it's worked. Our highways were designed for it. And if you go to the state of Michigan, even in Ohio, I'm not picking on them, but go to the state of Michigan and look at their roads from heavier trucks and how bad the infrastructure is there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with my 15 seconds left, Mr. Lindsay, I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate all your testimony. Mr. Lindsay, you had made some comments earlier, but I just want to change gears for 2 seconds now.
Yes, sir.
Both you and I are sports fans. Who's your favorite former NHL hockey player?
That would be the gentleman from Minnesota.
I yield back. Thank you,
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everybody on the panel for being here. Mr. Lindsay, I did have a question for you. I saw that you were an NBA scout for a number of years.
Yes, sir.
So my 11-year-old son loves playing basketball, and I asked him in the car the other day, I'm like, so where do you think you want to live when you grow up? And he's like, well, Dad, it depends where I get drafted. So
That's a really good answer to that question, to be honest.
Yeah. And as fortune would have it, I was taking him to a game in Detroit a year or two ago. And we're driving down the freeway, and he asked me, he's like, Dad, why are so many people injured here? And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, every quarter mile on the road, there's a giant billboard with a sign that says injured, a phone number, and somebody's picture on it. And I'm like, well, it's not from playing football, right? So I guess, a lot of this concern about lawsuit fraud and everything else, or the staged accident problem that we're witnessing, the absolutely critical cost of insurance that then really works its way down to the industry that you all work in and represent. Do you have any insight for us as to what steps we can take, if it's an enforcement issue, if it's a change in law, what statutorily, and what would be your recommendation for how we attack that problem?
Thank you for the question, and I'd love to meet your son.
He's here with me
we can
this
talk
week. He's
hoops.
on
We
spring
can
break.
talk about the Pistons who are actually doing something this year, which is exciting, right?
Yeah, not setting the losing streak record like they did last year. Yeah.
They won themselves out of a good pick.
Yes.
So that's a downside to winning games. Anyway, thank you for your question. It's a problem, right? It is an absolute epidemic that's gone on, and for all of us up here, and we can disagree on a few things as we have today, and I don't think they're right about a few things they've said. We can disagree with that, but one thing we can agree on is that the litigious environment that we're in makes things expensive for all of us, and ultimately. The folks on the end of those trucks, the folks that are paying for that cargo and that bottle of shampoo or whatever these guys are hauling are the ones that are going to pay for that, right? And so we're a part of a number of lawsuit reform programs, kind of state by state. We decided to attack it state by state because things seem to move a little slower here than they do in some state capitals. And so I think continuing the conversation is probably the most important thing we can do. And then looking at a surface bill for some language that makes sense to protect drivers, to protect construction companies, right, that are building things. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know, and you made the point, all of us are paying for it, whether it's in the professional aspect, whether it's and then that comes down into every single thing we purchase. And so much arrives now through that transportation network, all the way down to the delivery at your home that adds to the cost of all of this adding up. So I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Elliott, glad to see you're here from Michigan, of course. That's great to have you here in our nation's capital. And wanted to ask you a question, too. So right now, I know that there's some, within federal law, the age limit for truck drivers, there's, an idea that we could lower that age down to the age of adulthood at 18 instead of 21. Right now, you could go from where you live in Taylor, right, or where your facility is located, to the Toledo Jeep plant, and you could get there in less than an hour, right? But if you wanted to go all the way up to Ontonagon, to Trident Maritime Systems, I looked them up, they manufacture naval equipment, it would take you about 10 hours to get there. One would be entirely within the state of Michigan. The other would be just over across the border into Ohio. Does it make any plausible sense why a young man or a young woman of 18, 19, 20 years old could drive all the way over the Mackinac Bridge and over to Ontonagon and back, but not to Toledo, where they could almost ride their bike that far?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And that's part of the frustration with the current system. It lacks logic.
Yeah, okay. And then, Mr. Pugh, I know you got your start in the military, as I understand, and then transitioned into transportation from there. Were you trained in the military on truck driving? Is that how you got into this, or were you trained in another way?
Yeah, I was, I guess I would say I was trained on the farm first because I grew up on a farm in southern Ohio.
Good training.
So I had a little trucking. But yeah, I was an 88 Mike in the United States Army and proud of it.
Go
And
Army.
We were trained.
Yes. So would you agree with me that the training that you received from the military, while not exactly, representative, is a good training? So if you do come out of the military, and perhaps you're not 21 yet, you should be capable of safely operating a vehicle on our nation's system.
I would agree that you're trained how to drive the truck and operate the equipment. I do disagree with the fact that driving a truck in the military is just like driving a truck in the civilian world, because you have a lot more oversight. You have people over you. You a lot of times travel on convoys. You're loading the same thing like I've hauled fuel and out tanks. That's all I ever hauled. You come into the military, like I went into flatbed business, I'm hauling steel, I'm hauling beams, hauling all kinds of stuff. So I think there needs to be some more remedial training before we turn people loose. And as far as if they're under 21, I think there's other discussions we can have, such as air mile radius and stuff that would probably be more safer for highways.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Shreve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, witnesses. Jefferson Shreve, I'm from Indianapolis, so I represent a district that holds itself out as the crossroads of America. I've got I-70, I-65, I-69, I-74 running through the district, and a big FedEx air cargo hub. So we move a lot of traffic through the district, through the state. In my visits with groups like the National Tank Truck Carriers and ATA and whatnot, the issue that keeps coming back up is truck parking. Others have asked and talked about it today, but I don't think anyone has asked who your drivers would sort of hold out as being which states have gotten that right. If you're moving equipment across I-70, which states have more or less figured out how to provide for the parking that the industry needs to enable the drivers to be compliant while applying their profession? Because that's something that in the here and now, as we rebuild I-70 from Indianapolis over to the Ohio state line and are reworking our truck stops and figuring out from a zoning and use standpoint what can or can't go in these areas relative to the commercial development along the interstate exits, how we're going to figure out to provide for that need for parking, for all this truck traffic that moves through our state that underpins a distribution-based economy. So who's doing it right? Mr. Pugh, probably. I'm sorry, Mr. Elliott, Mr. Pugh, but probably Mr. Pugh in terms of the voice of your drivers. If you could help me with that.
Yeah, I'm not totally prepared to answer that question. I can tell you, being from the region, Michigan-based, Indiana has made some very good improvements, and I think is on the right track and positive. I don't have an answer state by state, but it's something I could probably go back and survey and get for you.
Okay, so you're seeing headway in improvements in the Chicagoland area, the region northwest Indiana, which isn't the part that I represent. But
that area's tough. Gary is not ideal.
Okay, Mr. Pugh, your drivers, your members, how do they feel? Who's doing it right?
I would say along Interstate 70, Indiana has done a good job. I've noticed that myself I'm from Ohio, and traveling to Kansas City area for work, for OIDA, back and forth. But Indiana's done a good job. Ohio's been doing a good job. I know the governor of Ohio's really fired up and wanting to improve parking. He's realizing that if the state of Ohio wants to stay a viable trade state, we need better parking, we need trucks. I think a lot of it comes down to educating people on, if you want your Amazon Prime package, you're gonna have to have trucks. It's just the way it is. But, my hat's off. I think a lot of the state DOTs in the last 3 or 4 years have really switched their focus and are starting to realize that parking is a big issue and a big problem.
Fair to characterize Indiana as doing a better job than Illinois?
I beg your pardon?
Is it fair to characterize Indiana as doing a better job in providing for truck parking than Illinois?
Sure.
I'll take that.
I would say that they are to a point. Yeah, there's still stretches of interstates in Illinois between St. Louis and Effingham that's still pretty lonely. There's a few truck stops, and there's a long stretches there. The thing that does frustrate truckers in all those states that we're talking about, Indiana, Ohio, are the little signs that they put out telling them how many spaces they are. Because truckers, we hear this all the time about how these telematics are so great, but truckers already know where there's no parking. They feel like that money would have been better spent if you'd have just put some more parking spots out there.
All right, okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Sykes, and thank you also to our witnesses for your testimony today, and thank you to the truck drivers that are here. I know how important your job is, and I appreciate you very much. I came from the concrete business to Washington, D.C., so I also appreciate the gentlemen that are trying to make a living in the trucking business as well. So this is especially salient hearing for me, and I'm glad to be here. I represent a very rural district in Ohio with roads are in desperate need of repair. There are many safety officials in my district have written to me about the concerns that increasing truck weight limits may have on roads. Mr. Lindsay, based on your experience and research, can you explain in a little bit further detail what increasing truck weight limits would mean in the long run for local roads?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Appreciate the question. First of all, let me say that we're not proposing bigger trucks. We're not proposing longer trucks. We've heard that 40 or 50 times since we've been sitting here today. That's not the case. Our pilot program, which will be an opt-in for the state of Ohio, which means they don't have to do it, right? Columbus can decide, takes the interstate weight from 80 to 91,000. Most roads in our country today that are off network, off the interstate, currently have more weight than that on them today. They are operating on today, and many with less than 6 axles, many with 5 axles at 90 to 92 to 95,000 pounds. And I don't hear drivers complaining about that. So we believe that taking those loads, it wouldn't be every load, but it would be a number of loads, say 20% of the loads. If we can move those onto the interstate and off those state and local roads, your local officials are going to be happy with that.
Now, my public school math indicates to me that if you added the extra axle, you would, on an 18-wheeler, you would increase braking surface area by 22%. If you went from 80,000 to 91,000, you'd increase the load by about 14%. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I have the same public school, China Spring, Texas math, so I'm going to trust you when you said that. So I don't have a calculator.
They already bulldozed my public school, so yours is probably better. So for as far as safety concerns, have they done actual studies? As there's been some testimony about stopping distances. After those numbers, is there proof that it takes longer to stop?
No, sir. It actually stops shorter with that 6 axle, and we will again provide that data to this committee. We are operating under those standards in Canada right now in a safe manner. And again, safety is our #1 priority, right? We have our brand on the side of our doors, and that means a lot to us. In the Shelley brand in Ohio, and whatever the Thompson brand in North Carolina, it means a lot to our folks. We're not going to do anything that's going to risk our drivers being safe or the general public being safe.
Right. I think anybody who's in the trucking business very long understands that even if you don't care about safety, you find out very quickly if you care about the bottom line, you practice safety.
Yes, sir.
On the issue of safety, it being so important, if I could just by a show of hands, who on the panel would favor a requirement that CDL drivers be able to read and speak English? Just raise your hand if you agree with that requirement. Wonderful. Thank you very much. American businesses have always been the best innovators, not the federal government. With that in mind, over the past decade, companies have vastly improved both trucking technology and fuel efficiency. Unfortunately, the previous administration has distorted the market with the EPA's de facto electric truck mandate. I fully support Administrator Zeldin's decision to reconsider this rule, and I'm confident the EPA will correct this flawed rule. Mr. Elliott, in your testimony, you mentioned that electric trucks make up only 0.01% of the commercial truck population. Can you highlight how this de facto electric truck mandate, should it remain in effect, will impact the trucking industry?
Quite simply, it would be devastating. We have one in our fleet due to a customer demand. The vehicle was almost 3.5 times the price of an associated diesel truck. Your average customer, which goes down to the consumer, does not want to pay that. I have a friend who's headed a large publicly traded company. The company itself is valued at $8 billion on the stock market. To convert to electric would cost $21 billion. So quite simply, in today's market, it is not financially feasible for companies to do it. The technology is not there. As an industry, we support clean technology and that, but we want it to come on a timeline that is financially viable for our customer or our companies and our customers, and something that is proven and safe and works. And that we are running with scissors right now to try to meet artificial timelines.
Thank you, and thank you to the whole panel. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Nails.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very important hearing today. It's good to see all the witnesses. I'm going to discuss for a few moments some of the priorities I've been working on for quite some time. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record Landline Magazine's February 2025 edition. If you need a quick summary from our nation's truckers' priorities, I recommend you go to page 48 and enjoy it. Page 48, Landline Magazine, all the priorities. So,
without objection.
Thank you so very much. Next week, I'm going to plan on reintroducing the Trucker Bathroom Access Act with Congresswoman Houlihan. The bill is supported by a wide variety of truckers, unions, trade associations, and members of this committee. Last Congress, it was co-sponsored by 6 Democrats, including Congressman Pappas, Congresswoman Scholten, Representatives Babin, my good buddy right here, Van Drew, and Mann, representing several members on this committee. It is ripe for a markup, and I will be filing it as an amendment to the surface reauthorization bill. So we will be getting a vote on this thing, one way or the other. We'll get a vote on it. I also want to reiterate my support for the work Mr. Boss has done on the truck parking. And I believe that Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act needs to be included in any surface reauthorization bill and is critical for safety. We simply can't put truckers parked on the side of the road. We've talked about it here for the last couple of hours. It's unfair to them. It's unfair to the public. We can find money for all other things. We find a lot of ways to waste a lot of money around here in this town. We should be able to find funding for our truck parking. I'd like to take a moment to formally attack and express my disdain for the awful policy of truck limiters. Speed limiters hurt our small and independent-owned truckers. Truck drivers find themselves unable to maintain pace with other vehicles, and it will likely manifest itself with risky driving. While they might be good for the large fleets, I'm adamantly opposed. This committee should focus on ways to help small businesses, not multinational corporations. I have truckers coming in and out of my office all day long, in and out of my office. And the consensus is these speed limiters are horrible, horrible idea. They are anti-American, big brother nonsense. I'd like to pivot to some questions here. Mr. Scandaleggi, thank you for being here, my friend. It's good to see you. Usually, you know, when we've been talking, we discuss rail safety, right? But today, we'll talk a little bit about truckers. The Teamsters endorsed the Trucker Bathroom Access Act. Is that correct?
Correct.
They did. We've heard today about the issue of increased truck weight as it directly impacts truck drivers. But drivers are not the only ones who are familiar with the danger of heavier trucks. Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to enter into the record a letter from the Teamsters Law Enforcement League raising their concerns.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. As a former law enforcement officer, I share their viewpoint. Mr. Scandaleggi, those who might be less familiar.
Thank you very much.
Why is it these police officers have such a strong position on this?
Thank you very much, and great to see you, Congressman. We're proud to represent about 50,000 members in law enforcement, many of them who are sworn police. And they have the rather unfortunate responsibility of being the first responders following truck crashes, including, unfortunately, tragic truck crashes. And they're responsible for the aftermath of those incidents. And they report to us that in incidents involving heavier, longer trucks, they have observed more severe accidents. And so not only on the behalf of our drivers, but on behalf of the experiences of Teamsters law enforcement members, we raise that concern.
Very well. I noticed that even in a highway and transit hearing, there are rail issues to discuss, and you specifically raised the CDL training for rail workers. Can you explain what the problem is there, and how does this subcommittee play a role in rail safety?
Well, there's always an opportunity for rail safety, Congressman. But a little-known fact is we're proud to represent the nation's maintenance of way workers on the railroads. And somewhere in the order of 75% of maintenance of way workers who repair track, who repair structures, have to hold the CDL to operate specialized construction vehicles. And so we've done a lot of talking today about generalized training to receive your CDL. We also feel that there are some gaps as it relates to those specialized construction rail vehicles that we look forward to working with Congress on and surface.
Thank you. I appreciate all your testimony. I yield back.
Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate all of you. This is a long morning, lots of questions, lots of statements. Some of it we've done before, but we got to keep trying, man. Like, you know, we've danced this dance many times before. If you're here for a few years, you know it. And I'm going to state the obvious, and you've heard it before. Trucking really is the heartbeat of America. In an era when we're trying to save money, we should never hurt the people who work so damn hard to make sure we get the goods that we need. Whether the weather condition, whether the conditions in general, they're out there, they're working, they're breaking their back. As we look forward to this reauthorization, it's critical that we advance measures that also promote truckers' safety and their job security. It matters, and it's got to remain a top priority. As we see more and more interest in autonomous truck technology, We as a committee must ensure that it is done safely, that it's done properly, that it is done with the truckers in mind, and without doing undue harm to the workforce. This technology is still new. It's very new, and it's largely untested, particularly in trucks. As it develops, there must be human beings behind the wheel to ensure that nothing fails and that nobody gets hurt. Over the past decade, we've lost 114,000 drivers from the workforce, as we all know. It's hard to recruit them. It's a hard job. People don't want to work that hard anymore. Nobody wants to talk about that. But if you notice, in general, jobs that are real hard and you really got to break your back, it's hard. It doesn't matter. The trades, even though the fact that it pays good money, wherever it is, it's not easy. Recruiting, retaining qualified drivers must be part of any serious transportation policy. We can't overlook it. We can't forget about it. We can't pretend it's not there. And despite the industry-wide push for recruitment, we've recently heard major voices from the tech, automotive, and freight industries renewing their push for the rapid deployment of autonomous trucks. I'm not saying there's no place for them, but I'm saying we got to really watch what we're doing and be careful here. Mr. Pugh, thank you for being here again today. We have danced this dance, but what are you hearing from your stakeholders as far as the impact of autonomous vehicles right now?
Yeah, my members have a lot of concern. Of course, they're concerned about their jobs, first and foremost, I would say. But, I think we can all probably agree that this technology's down the road, and I believe that it'll probably come. I don't think it's going to take all trucking jobs by any means. I think there's certain things it can probably do, but I still think it's a long way. The bigger concerns come down to all these questions that never get answered. For one, they have self-reporting, so that we find that kind of scary, that they can only have to report what they want to report. So I'm sure they're reporting the good things and not the bad. That's usually how you would handle that kind of situation. There's also huge concerns in cybersecurity that are being asked, because the componentry of some of these things come from, again, countries who don't really like us. So they would probably like to be able to take over a truck. I've seen a special in 60 Minutes where they could take over a minivan with a laptop and make it start and stop and do all these things. So that's a huge concern in trucking.
May I just stop you for a moment, because I appreciate that. That cybersecurity is a big deal. I'm from the state of New Jersey. A lot of trucks go through New Jersey, right? But beside that, they just put the Easy Pass system out to bid. A lot of people don't know this, and it's not only New Jersey. The company that got the bid, and they weren't even the low bidder, the company that they got the bid is a company from Singapore. And on their board was a direct connect, an individual on their board. He had to take himself off the board, but there are other connects there as well with the Communist Chinese. So we're allowing them to control, as you talked about, it's happening in your industry with the laptops, it's a lot of our toll roads across the country now. I don't know what the hell is wrong with us as a Congress that we can't see that this is a problem. This shouldn't be allowed to happen. In your example, or even in the example of that Easy Pass bid. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yes, you're exactly correct. That's a huge, huge concern. And again, the other concern is, what do these trucks do in an accident situation, such as, say, there's a school bus or some family of car with kids on the side? Do they hit the car? Do they go in a ditch? Do they run over the people? I imagine these things are probably programmed at least to go for the path of least resistance so they get the least amount of harm. We also find it troubling that we've asked for either myself or other members who have trucking experience to come take a ride in one of these vehicles, and we still have never been taken up on that offer.
Unbelievable. If it's good, why don't they want you on a ride?
Exactly.
Okay. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today. Before we get into the questioning, Mr. Lindsay, I learned today that you were an NBA scout, and I've got to say, you must not have been a good one, because as one of the premier athletes in North Carolina, I would be playing for the Utah Jazz or the Charlotte Hornets, not here in Congress. So I just wanted to get that out there. But Mr. Elliott, last week we were home in the district, and I met with about a half dozen different trucking companies in my district, and one of the same things came up with every different one of them. And so I want to ask you a question, yes or no, and I'll point out that from Murphy to Manteo in North Carolina, that's from tip to tip, side to side in North Carolina, it's 545 miles. From Charlotte to Rock Hill, South Carolina is 28 miles. Is there a logical explanation for why someone could not make a drive from Charlotte to Rock Hill, but they could make it from Murphy to Manteo?
No, there is not. The
What a wild concept that is.
I wish I could answer that for you.
Well, I mean, there's no real explanation, so I think you did. Mr. Glessing, you detailed how exemptions from Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's hour of service requirements can be vital to truckers hauling livestock or perishable commodities. Can you put a finer point on this issue by explaining, from your perspective, what would happen if exemptions are not continued in the surface transportation reauthorization?
Certainly appreciate the question. When we're hauling animals, for instance, the animal welfare aspect of that is probably obviously the safety around you, but also those animals in that trailer. And if you lift that exemption, you'd hate to think what would happen, because when you are that close, those critters need to get to where they're going. And that's why it's so important to keep that.
Gotcha. Mr. Elliott, another thing that came up last week in my meetings was where are these truckers supposed to park? And as you know, states may use the highway formula funds to expand available truck parking. However, as we learned at a hearing here in January, shortages of truck parking still exist, and truckers can spend nearly an hour on average looking for a parking spot. In your opinion, why have states prioritized other highway projects over truck parking, and what can be done to incentivize investments and increase capacity for parking along major trucking routes?
I think truck parking is not essentially the sexiest thing for constituents when they take it back. Everyone needs products, wants products, so they want it faster and faster, but yet nobody wants trucks. Those things do not balance or go together. Like you said, an hour a day spent on that. Our drivers on average use 6 to 7 hours of their 11. They sat 1.2 billion hours last year in traffic. That equates to 435,000 trucks that never moved, that sat idle. So that's, again, part of where our industry looks at weight increases or size increases and say, that's a Band-Aid on a much larger problem that we need to fix the congestion. And if we help fix the congestion, it would help the trucking parking situation hand in hand.
Gotcha. Mr. Lindsay, what federal policies or local recruitment initiatives do you think are most effective in supporting the trucking and supply chain logistics industry, and how could Congress remove barriers to entry for individuals who are interested in pursuing careers in trucking?
Thank you for the question. And I noticed you walked in. You have a plus wingspan, which is absolutely something we would look for. So I should have written that up earlier. I apologize. Look, doing everything we can do to train. We've heard the word train up here, which is fantastic. The ease of getting a CDL, but the ease of training those folks, making that more attractive and keeping them in the profession. We continue to lose folks. We got to keep them in the profession. One of the ways we believe you can do that is to make their routes as efficient as possible and take as much stress off of them as we can, and eliminate as much driver fatigue as possible. So gross vehicle weight limits, I keep going back to that. It's not bigger trucks, it's not longer trucks, it's just a pilot program that increases from 80 to 91,000, adds a sixth axle, and puts those trucks on the interstate system.
Gotcha. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Let's see, are there further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I want to thank each of our witnesses. I think the panel was absolutely outstanding, and each of you got your points across very well, I thought. Subcommittee stands adjourned.